Lord of the Mystery, Lucky by author Nan Haiyu Xing Chen. Chapter 326-360. Chapter 326 Chapter 9 I paid. Thinking of this, Alice chuckled, her gentle but emotionless gaze falling on the man as she asked in an ethereal voice. Oh, you've seen other Cassandras. The man looked at her somewhat blankly. Cassandra, Alice drew out the syllables, the cursed soothsayer. This wasn't a lie. Alice no longer believed in coincidences in the Beyonder world. She firmly believed that anyone named Cassandra, even if it started as a coincidence, would eventually become the real thing. If she had to explain, it was simply that the name had an unfortunate meaning. Wasn't it only natural for someone with such a name to end up living a miserable life? Alice steadfastly ignored any possibility that this had anything to do with her. After all, she really did seem to be the type to make people who inherited famous names experience the same fate as those celebrities. The man's expression was a mix of confusion and shock. As if wanting to confirm something, he repeated Alice's words. The cursed soothsayer. Before Alice could respond, he suddenly became agitated, barely concealing his anger as he said. It's her. It must be her. She's the one who ruined me. Alice recalled Klein's pitying smile. Although the man couldn't see it, she still made that expression and gently soothed him. Poor child. It seems she transferred fate's punishment to you. Yes, that's right, it must be. He looked indignant. That damned Cassandra. Oh, don't misunderstand, I'm not talking about you. You are a good person, you are not like her. Reckless, irritable, credulous, prone to shifting blame and transferring losses to others after making mistakes. Combining his experiences and known information, Alice quickly pieced together his personality traits and general experiences during this period. He seemed to have been lured by a potion, becoming addicted to gambling. Potions, again with potions. Alice instantly thought of Evelyn. She pursed her lips, her voice unconsciously turning a little colder. What is your name? This seemed to be just right. The man thought she was bothered by his previous words, and stammered, Selwyn Magridge. Selwyn, Alice quickly reined in her emotions, you coveted fate's gift first. She had already given you compensation beforehand. What you lost is the price you should pay. Fate's gift. Selwyn was slightly stunned. Alice said indifferently, you have already gained power beyond the mundane. You are no longer an ordinary person, are you? No, Selwyn suddenly became agitated again, that was a transaction. I paid for it. Paid for it. A hint of confusion flickered in Alice's eyes. She still couldn't understand why a soothsayer would do such a thing, scamming a child. Moreover, she even charged for the Sequence 9 potion formula. It felt like she was quite short on money. Alice subtly glanced at Selwyn and said calmly. Of course, you paid for it. So you haven't lost anything more. Selwyn's face instantly turned pale as if he had remembered something. He gritted his teeth and said. No. How can this be? How could she not explain it beforehand? I never agreed. That's what happens when you receive compensation in advance, Alice said flatly. No. Selwyn suddenly looked at Alice excitedly. Please, please help me. Help me find her, help me get my things back, help me. Why should I help you? Alice interrupted him. Selwyn was struck dumb on the spot. A full minute passed before he spoke dryly. You are kind-hearted, you are a good person, you are not like her. Greedy. Alice added another trait to Selwyn's character but didn't respond to his words. After a good while suppressing the twitching of her lips, she said in a calm voice. Tell me what happened to you. She neither agreed nor refused. More accurately, she was still in a state of bewilderment. Someone actually praised her as kind-hearted. Alice still had that much self-awareness. At least, if she were truly kind-hearted, she wouldn't be here trying to trick information about that soothsayer. As for compensation, isn't telling him who the real culprit is who caused his misfortune enough? Alice thought it was enough, so this transaction was valid. Selwyn took this as tacit agreement and immediately began his narration. I originally had a very peaceful life. Although my family wasn't rich, we could afford food and clothing, and lived a decent life. I grew up step by step, always living a peaceful life, but secretly, I always longed for an adventure. Until recently. Not long ago, I suddenly met someone. She told me that the opportunity for change I had long awaited had arrived, that the wheel of fate had begun to turn, and that as long as I did as she said, I would have the life I dreamed of. I didn't believe it at first, but her prophecies were very accurate. After experiencing danger twice when I didn't listen to her, I began to believe her prophecies. She told me that the opportunity to change my destiny was close at hand, but obtaining the opportunity required £1,000. £1,000, do you know how much money that is? If I continued to work, I might never save enough money in my life, so I. He suddenly stopped, biting his lower lip with his upper teeth, remaining silent for a long time. Alice couldn't bear it any longer and openly finished his unspoken words. You stepped into the casino and began your first gamble. That time, you won. You were very excited. You obtained a huge sum of money for the first time. You immediately forgot your original purpose and used that money to thoroughly enjoy life, but good times didn't last, and the money was soon spent. To make up for the losses, you had to enter the casino again. Fortunately, this time didn't disappoint you either, you earned another sum of money. This story cycled repeatedly, but no matter what, you finally got what you wanted, and you successfully became one of those special people. You finally realized your dream, didn't you? I paid for it. No matter what, that bottle of potion was bought with my money. Selwyn emphasized again. Alice revealed a smile under her veil that no one could see and whispered. No, you only paid for the potion. You didn't pay compensation when she revealed the revelations of fate to you. Besides, how do you know that the money you won in the casino wasn't a gift from fate? End of this chapter. Chapter 327 Chapter 10 Inches Swindler, and Prophet. This success left Selwyn stunned. He was clearly accustomed to receiving gifts from others, accustomed to people being good to him for free. Even if he wasn't, no one would distinguish things in such detail. This was clearly a deliberate deception. After realizing this, Selwyn's expression turned to shock and anger. Swindler. Alice looked at him silently, not pointing out that his gambling addiction was actually his own problem. Under normal circumstances, his consequence seemed to be merely losing some money. No, that wouldn't count as an adventure. Alice frowned, a flash of inspiration crossing her mind, and she asked aloud. What is the name of the potion you drank? If there was anything that could be called a fated adventure, it could only be a Sequence 9 potion with endless troubles. This question was a bit abrupt. Selwyn's attitude wavered slightly as he looked up at Alice, but he still replied. Assassin. He seems to think I should know the answer. No, wait, what was it called? Alice's eyes widened instantly. Her only remaining rationality prevented her from questioning him aloud, but her drastic changes in expression and movement still made Selwyn realize that there seemed to be a problem with this potion. He asked nervously. What's wrong? Is there a problem with this potion? No, there's no problem at all. It even perfectly fulfilled your wish. This is truly an exciting adventure. Alice looked at Selwyn with a complicated expression, knowing that her unusual reaction just now could not be hidden. She decided to go along with it, sighing with a hint of a smile in her voice. If you continue down this path, it will become an extraordinary adventure. You will experience things you could never have experienced before, feel things you could never have felt before, whether it's happiness and joy, or unbearable pain. Many things you never had the chance to try in the past, you can now experience. You will also experience joys you couldn't before. Perhaps one day in the future, you will regret your current choice, but no matter what, this will be a precious experience. Alice pieced together these words with artistic language, painting a grand picture for Selwyn. She guaranteed that everything she said was true. How is becoming a woman not an extraordinary adventure? Pregnancy and childbirth are also things that were impossible to experience before. Do witches have periods? A strange thought flashed through Alice's mind and was naturally ignored by her. After all, what did it have to do with her? At most, she would ask the next time she met a witch. As for the joys that couldn't be experienced before, Rosal could testify, it was true, he even wrote a diary. Alice's brilliant speech didn't have as much effect as she hoped. Selwyn still looked somewhat uneasy, and he looked at Alice as if he wanted to speak but hesitated. Perhaps his spirituality intuition was working at this moment. Selwyn instinctively felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint it, only a sense of unease and apprehension about the future entanglement him. Alice didn't give him a chance to speak, but instead said to him, Child, don't focus too much on those illusory futures. That won't help you dispel the shadow cast over your destiny, nor will it help you solve your current predicament. Focus on the present things, such as that shameless person cursed by destiny. Do you remember anything unique about her? Recall carefully, for only then can we unveil her disguise and return destiny's punishment in full. The style was correct, and this affected way of speaking successfully restored Selwyn's trust, which had been somewhat shaken. He recalled carefully. There doesn't seem to be anything. She was dressed like that too, nothing stood out. Oh right, I once saw her holding a book. A book. Alice almost jumped up. There are no coincidences in the Beyonder world. Alice recalled the book with the ocean blue cover. If it was the remnant of a soothsayer, and it or he possessed a relatively complete consciousness, then he really might be calling himself Cassandra and acting. The things Selwyn experienced were partially answered. This involved not only the soothsayer's contribution, but also the swindler's. He actually encountered a swindler posing as a soothsayer. For Alice, what was important now was only Cassandra's purpose and the origin of that honorific name. Objectively speaking, there were actually too many people who could spread the legend of Cassandra. Even putting aside the most unreliable Rosal, the ancient sun god, who called himself God Almighty and named his child Adam, was obviously very suspicious. Besides that, the goddess might have heard this story from her. Note 1. Lilith, with her distinctive name, was temporarily not within Alice's scope of suspicion, as this name might not have been chosen by her, and besides, sanguine didn't sound like they could be related to a soothsayer. In fact, as long as Cassandra didn't first hear this story from her past self, it wasn't a big deal. It was evident that the truly important thing here was whether Cassandra actually knew her past self, whether the honorific name written down was a coincidence, and what exactly did she do with the knowledge in the soothsayer potion. As soon as she thought of this question, Alice felt a headache. She was too obviously surprised, even her voice briefly changed pitch. Selwyn clearly sensed that something was wrong. He stopped speaking and looked at Alice. Oh no. Alice looked at him silently for 2 seconds, then thought of a remedy. She chuckled and sighed. So that's how it is. No wonder. Perhaps we were all wrong. Perhaps that book is the real Cassandra. Selwyn's eyes widened. Alice curved her lips and continued. A deep blue ocean forms the cover, silver runes write the text. It is a divine artifact that foretells the future, and a treasure that can find hope for people in distress. Use it well, and it will become a sharp tool for your success. Unfortunately, the real Cassandra has lost the ability to speak. The one who spoke to you was nothing but a swindler. She deceives in Cassandra's name. Those at the turning points of destiny, those who yearn for change, are all tempted by her and fall into her meticulously designed traps. Including you, Selwyn Magridge. You are not the first victim, and certainly not the last. Her figure and voice disappeared into the alley together, leaving only the dazed Selwyn Magridge. End of chapter. Chapter 328. Chapter the 11th of May. Cassandra bless you. Evelyn was in the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral when she heard Alice's voice. Have you ever seen a book on Sylvia? Or heard a name called Cassandra? Along with the message came an image of a book with a sea blue cover, adorned with faint silver runes. Seen it. Evelyn tried to recall Sylvia's image in her memory. Gentle, kind, patient. She didn't remember such a book existing. However, what she did remember was the day she met that terrifying monster, which was actually her first encounter with Sylvia. Sylvia, dressed in a black robe, brushed past her but then abruptly stopped. Oh, what do I see? A tender bird, Sylvia said to her. A frail sapling cannot steal the sunlight from a towering tree, yet it threatens with the fledglings nesting in its canopy. How pitiful, child. Few people would be indifferent to such words. Even if they didn't trust them, they would stop to see what kind of person spoke like that. Evelyn, who was already interested in mysticism, was no exception. She turned her head, filled with curiosity and doubt, to seek the source of the voice. Sylvia stopped, turned back, and gave her a smile. She drew a circular pattern on her chest with her finger and said in a gentle tone, "May Cassandra bless you." Unsure of exactly what Alice needed, but already aware of the ambiguous relationship between Alice and the night church, she did not leave the basement. She simply made an excuse to go to the washroom to be alone, then transmitted the image from her memory. Meanwhile, Alice, who received the message, was sleeping with "Do Not Disturb" enabled. After disappearing from Selwyn's sight, Alice, of course, went to eat. After filling 3 different stomachs with a main course, snacks, and dessert, Alice began to stuff ice cream into her 4th stomach. As everyone knows, humans have 4 stomachs, Alice muttered to herself as she walked. Can a faceless really conjure 4 stomachs later on? This bizarre thought paused her for a moment. Alice recalled the 2 fake eyes on Klein's face and concluded that at least the current faceless shouldn't be able to do such a thing. As for later, it was probably similar to whether Eamon could steal stomach lining. It should be possible, but without knowledge in that area, it might be molded into strange shapes. For example, someone who doesn't understand human anatomy might place an eye on the back of their head or a mouth in the palm of their hand. Alice imagined the scene, finished the ice cream in a few bites, then walked home expressionlessly. Her appetite had vanished. After eating, Alice finally got down to business. She issued her first relatively normal oracle, then immediately entered "Do Not Disturb" mode to sleep. By the time she saw the message, it was already the next day. Evelyn transmitted that memory along with the time. After reviewing the memory, Alice murmured, "It's like watching a video, why didn't she add subtitles and text explanations to the video?" This question obviously couldn't be answered, so Alice could only assume the figure in the black robe with a highlight was Sylvia. It's worth noting that Sylvia's voice was not as hoarse and unpleasant as that mysterious person's voice that day. Of course, that mysterious person's voice was clearly a disguise. Alice shook her head, not dwelling on such issues, and focused on Sylvia's words. Combining the actual situation, Alice could easily interpret Sylvia's inexplicable words. Coupled with her final phrase, "May Cassandra bless you," Alice had already more or less condemned Sylvia in her heart. The outline of the entire matter was largely clear. The core point was the mysterious book that called itself Cassandra. Both Selwyn and the unfortunate person who prayed that day were clearly victims. Only Sylvia made Alice unsure of the specific situation. Was she a complicit perpetrator, or a controlled puppet? Or both? After contemplating over breakfast for a long time, Alice finally remembered something in a daze. Am I supposed to have class? This was a very serious question. Alice temporarily put aside her investigation into the Cassandra series of events and decided to return to the Golden Dream first. She was indeed late. Alice, pretending she had overslept, silently walked over. Edwina, however, wasn't too harsh on her. She merely called her aside after the lesson and asked her, "When you came to me, was it initially to find information about your potion's main ingredients?" This was essentially the truth, and Alice couldn't refute it. She lowered her head and said, "Actually, another part of the reason might be that someone thought I was too idle." Alice didn't say who, because she wasn't sure if saying Gehrman or Mr. Fool's name here would be the right decision. As a secret organization, this seemed a bit too ostentatious. Edwina merely glanced at Alice and made a reasonable guess. This was probably a case where the adults at home couldn't teach her anymore. However, there was one thing Edwina had been curious about for a long time. It should have been quite some time since you swallowed that sealed artifact of Sequence 0. Even if not, I imagine you probably aren't too quiet of a child, are you? Alice nodded hesitantly. Why have I never heard of your, deeds? Edwina asked with a hint of curiosity. Alice swallowed hard. Alice. Edwina called her name, puzzled. Alice swallowed with difficulty, her eyes firm as she said, "I didn't do any of it, I've been wronged." Edwina looked at Alice and fell into thought. Fortunately, Alice still had a shred of sanity left. She didn't blurt out nonsense like, "Eamon did it all," but quickly changed the subject. "Anyway, I think I might need to go find potion ingredients, and earn some money." Edwina seemed to have been prepared for this. She readily agreed and reminded her, "Don't forget your reward, if you really don't know how to bypass the hidden sage, there's actually something else I'm also interested in." "What?" Alice asked, puzzled. Edwina's meaningful gaze fell upon her as she said, "What exactly is the sealed artifact of Sequence 0 you swallowed? And why do you still need a Sequence 4 potion?" Chapter 329 Chapter 12 Confession on Danitz's behalf. Alice's body instantly stiffened. Edwina's inquiring gaze was still on her, The look wasn't heavy, it could even be called gentle, but that didn't stop Alice from becoming instantly nervous. What exactly was the Sequence Zero sealed artifact she swallowed? Should she say it? No, can she say it? The existence of a uniqueness undoubtedly involved the secrets of Sequence Zero, a secret that, like the acting method, was hidden by all the major churches. This couldn't be said, could it? Alice hesitated only for a brief moment before deciding to respect everyone's decision on such matters. Go ask the God of Wisdom. He definitely knows. He inherited the Creator's authority of omniscience. Eating it also counts as inheriting, right? Alice's tone was firm, but her eyes flickered. Edwina frowned, glancing at Alice's expression, and after comparison, found that this was exactly how a child looked when doing something naughty. So, such a question must absolutely not be asked of the God of Wisdom. In comparison, Alice's statement about inheriting the Creator's authority of omniscience didn't attract Edwina's attention in the slightest. Similar statements exist in the holy books of various churches. For example, the Night Church's creation myth states that Lord of Storms, Eternal Blazing Sun, and God of Knowledge and Wisdom were born from the Creator's Spirit. Who would have thought these three guys had split and eaten the Creator? This truly was a Last Supper in every sense of the word. Thinking of this, Alice shook her head, no longer continuing to tell stories of, you know, I know, the Creator knows, lest one of the protagonists from the story come over and glance at her, making things awkward. If she couldn't ask, judging by her attitude, this should involve some kind of secret, a secret related to a deity. A flicker of light crossed Edwina's eyes, and she looked at Alice, asking, is this a secret forbidden by a deity to be spread? How did she guess? Alice looked at her in surprise, praising her without reservation. You're so smart. Does believing in the God of Wisdom really make one smarter? Edwina glanced at Alice, her tone flat, saying, Emperor Rosal once said, reading makes one wise. It's Rosal again. Alice, who had just recalled the creation myth, had her thoughts pulled away by Rosal being mentioned again. Rosal is truly everywhere. What was that phrase again? Lingering spirit. With so many people talking about him, he wouldn't really climb out of his grave one day because of all the chatter, would he? Alice, who had done quite a few bad deeds, began to worry about her future. Even if he climbed out, he wouldn't coincidentally see those 2 pages of the diary, would he? Even if he saw them, he wouldn't be able to deny that he didn't write them, would he? And he doesn't know who I am. He shouldn't know, right? Alice frantically pushed Rosal out of her mind and answered Edwina's question. Actually, it might not be a secret elsewhere, angels and above might know, but the deity of your Church of Knowledge ate the Creator, he would probably worry that his believers might eat him too, right? Alice looked up at the sky, beginning to evade the question, and Edwina, who had already grasped Alice's personality, smoothly dropped the inquiry. If something could be said, Alice would blurt it all out in 2 sentences, without needing anyone to ask, but once she avoided the topic, no matter how much you pressed or tried to trick her, she wouldn't reveal a single word. In comparison, Edwina was actually a bit unclear about Alice's criteria for judging what could and couldn't be said. She had, after all, dropped the bombshell about swallowing a Sequence Zero sealed artifact as soon as she got on the ship. It couldn't all be based on intuition, could it? She didn't voice this doubt, she merely glanced at Alice and gently moved on from the topic. If you still have things you want to know, you are welcome to return here. Of course, you can also come to play even if you don't, as long as you're not planning to treat the Golden Dream as a toy. This was a farewell, and a touch of melancholy suddenly crept into Alice's heart. Edwina was actually the only one who would patiently listen to her talk. Of course, Amen didn't count. Alice was referring to the kind of elder who would seriously listen to her. Evidently, the goddess would definitely be too lazy to bother with her, and Klein only counted as half. In fact, Edwina might also only be half, as Alice wouldn't be too presumptuous in front of Edwina. She somewhat acknowledged Edwina's identity as a teacher. Although her aversion to classes was etched deep into her soul, Alice had to admit that Edwina was indeed a good teacher, excellent both in imparting knowledge and in interacting with students. Perhaps this was the strength of someone professionally trained. Alice felt that if she told Edwina that she had stolen the Lord of Storm's donation box, it probably wouldn't. Bah, what nonsense, Eamon was the one who stole it. Alice shook off the jumbled thoughts in her mind and decided to say something to break the melancholic atmosphere. After much deliberation, she decided to confess for Dunitz. Do you know, in Dunitz's heart, you are the true gold and dream. Edwina's brows furrowed slightly. Alice looked at her, her expression becoming serious. You really didn't know this. Sigh, actually, Dunitz has been secretly in love with you for a long time. He's always liked you, but he just didn't dare to say it. Once before, Dunitz got drunk in a bar and confessed to you with snot and tears. It was truly heartbreaking to watch. Since I'm leaving, as a friend, I must say what he dared not, to fulfill a regret for him. Captain, Dunitz is a very good person. He might be a bit foolish, not very smart, a bit weak, and his education level isn't high. At least he has a sincere heart for you. Captain, you must seriously consider him. Even if you don't like him, don't make him sad. Edwina's frown deepened, and Alice finally, tactfully, shut her mouth, hastily blurting out. My mom's calling me home for dinner, I'm leaving first. Edwina opened her mouth to say something, but Alice seemed genuinely urgent. Before her words finished, she had already vanished from the spot. So who was her mother? How could she be at ease leaving her with Gehrman Sparrow? No, this was clearly an excuse. Edwina finally understood the truth. She shook her head, then recalled Alice's earlier words, and after a moment of thought, she pushed open the captain's cabin door and said to a free sailor. Have you seen Dunitz? Tell him to come see me when he gets back. Chapter 330 Chapter 13 Adam, what do you think? Alice listed the things she needed to do on her checklist, one by one. Investigate the Cassandra series of incidents. No rush on this, I'll wait for Sylvia to dig up Amon's grave, and judging by the way things are going, I'll keep running into her. Gather Beander potion ingredients. This can actually be broken down. The auxiliary ingredients aren't too hard to find, some can be bought, and for others, I can just go catch one. The most crucial ritual is already complete, and then the two main ingredients. Should I go look in places where they're likely to appear? Remote places with some history. Does Amon's mausoleum count? Oh no, what am I thinking? Throwing the bizarre thoughts out of her head, Alice decided to temporarily give up on finding the Raven Shadow Serpent and focus on the Doom Shade. Let someone else experience horror stories like corpses in coffins suddenly opening their eyes or portraits greeting you. So, where should she look for places filled with tragedy and suffering? Go to the spirit world to catch. No, that's also too much trouble. Can't I just artificially create a place full of tragedy and suffering? Unfriendly thoughts smoothly emerged. It did sound convenient and would definitely be smoother for Alice than aimlessly searching for monsters, but Alice quickly sealed this thought away. She herself wasn't particularly resistant to this option, and as long as the target wasn't a follower of the goddess, Alice guessed the goddess probably wouldn't bother. Otherwise, the mere fact that she stole the Lord of Storm's donation box would be enough. Wait, wasn't that Eamon who stole it? Forgetting the basic principle of, all bad things are done by Eamon, once again, Alice almost admitted her own error. Fortunately, she realized in time, deeply understood Amon's profound sinfulness, and thoroughly reflected on her previous mistake. After completing her self-reflection, Alice shook her head and sighed softly. Klein, sigh. Clearly, Klein would definitely mind such a thing. In fact, Alice guessed that in the entire tarot club, probably only the hanged man Alger and the hermit Catlia would be perfectly fine with such behavior. No, actually Alice wasn't entirely sure if Catlia would be perfectly fine with it, but Alger would probably just pretend to be dead, used to such things. Alice shook her head, sighed, and gave up on the idea. After all, she still had other options for now. However, didn't Klein mention that the steam church had a mirror that knew everything? Should I go steal? No, I'll go borrow it, go ask the church. Alice once again suppressed some thoughts that didn't conform to social norms and decided to do what a favored one of a god should do in such a situation. She went to the church to pray. Such a small matter certainly didn't require directly asking the goddess, but since she was already at the church, it felt wrong not to pray. Since I'm already here, After quietly completing her prayer, Alice skillfully stepped underground, revealed herself before Archbishop Anthony, and stated her request. Borrowing a sealed artifact of Sequence 2 was not a big deal. As an official, Archbishop Anthony said something that Alice deeply detested. "No problem. I will notify you after I have negotiated with the machinery hivemind." Troublesome human social system. Although she really wanted to kick something and throw a tantrum, looking at the Archbishop, who was only a saint, Alice felt she should act a bit like an angel in front of someone she wasn't familiar with. She forced herself to show a smile. "All right, thank you for your help." Archbishop Anthony's gaze flickered with a hint of doubt as he looked at her, then he nodded, signaling that she could leave. Alice walked, pondering what his last doubtful look meant, until she walked out of the church door and realized, she didn't have any angelic image here at all, did she? After all, her stealing Amon's glasses and the Storm Church's donation box should still be quite famous, just like a long time ago when she almost became a tourist attraction because she accidentally swallowed a lucky one Beander characteristic. Thinking of this, Alice suddenly felt a little melancholic. She bit her lip, suddenly feeling a desire to return to Tingen City to see. Speaking of which, shouldn't she have a pension? A new thought pulled away that hint of melancholy, and Alice began to seriously consider the possibility of getting rich by becoming a Nighthawk right pointing arrow faking death right pointing arrow collecting a pension right pointing arrow becoming a Nighthawk right pointing arrow faking death right pointing arrow collecting a pension right pointing arrow becoming a Nighthawk. How much should an angel's pension be? Alice looked back at the church door, thought seriously for a moment, and decided that going back and asking such a question might get her beaten. She left sadly. For Alice, what followed was actually an unavoidable, boring daily life. She even started drawing drafts out of boredom. During the climax of the last volume, one day, the young Demon King, in the Demon King's palace, looked at the butler who had always been present in the palace. This butler had existed since before the birth of the first Demon King, responsible for receiving and instructing each Demon King, then burying them, and then welcoming the new Demon King. In the last volume, the current Demon King finally became aware of this butler who had always been like an invisible person. She questioned the butler and, from the subtle magical fluctuations, discovered that the butler had been using incantations to bewitch people, and the butler's purpose was to incite war between humans and demons. Honestly, the plot of the third volume was mostly written by Alice, as the original work had completely fallen apart here. Alice only retained the setting of the grand world view. Beyond all worlds, there would be hands, which sowed new worlds, and each world would have eyes, which watched their corresponding worlds grow. Suddenly one day, an eye no longer wanted to be an eye. It wanted to become a hand, and sow a world of its own. So it made a bet with the master of all hands and eyes. If it could successfully destroy a world and not reveal its identity, using only the power of incantations to bewitch people, then the seed of that world would be given to it. It had 10 chances in total, and this was the third world it had experienced, which is why this story is called World Observation Log 3. And precisely because of this, now, having finally finished all her drafts, Alice fell into hesitation after reviewing them from beginning to end. She looked around, hesitated for a long time, then tentatively asked the air beside her. "Adam, what do you think?" End of this chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 331 Chapter 14 Magic Mirror. Magic Mirror tells me. No matter how Alice looked at it, she felt that throughout the story, the butler seemed to be hinting at Adam's existence. Although Alice could swear to God that her initial actions had absolutely nothing to do with Adam, it was related to 008. Now that things had come to this, Alice felt she should still ask Adam. This was out of respect for a king of angels. Well, to be honest, she just didn't want to offend Adam for now. This king of angels of the spectator pathway was too mysterious. Alice still hadn't figured out his purpose or his bottom line. Even in today's situation, Adam merely took a glance and left. Was this considered tacit approval? Alice didn't know, but since she wasn't stopped, Alice decided to take it as tacit approval. However, Adam is much more convenient than shouting his honorific name, Alice murmured to herself. If that's the case, why couldn't Adam have been added to the method used against Aemon, besides the Lord of Storms? Thinking of this, Alice took a deep breath and shrieked, "Help! Adam, your brother is trying to kill me." Adam's gaze lingered on Alice for a considerable time this time, seemingly with no intention of withdrawing. Alice guessed he must be very confused right now. After all, no matter how she looked at it, her behavior whenever Adam noticed her didn't seem to be what one would call normal. Alice thought for a moment, closed her eyes, and devoutly made the sign of the cross over her chest. Then, before she could even speak, Adam withdrew his gaze. What was that for? Alice angrily but very cautiously slapped the table, gritted her teeth, and decided to send the comic to the magazine publisher. After returning from the magazine publisher, Alice realized her life had become boring again. It was already a new week. With the thought that something was better than nothing, Alice put out a request to find the main ingredients for a potion at the Tarot Club. What if someone had seen them? With nothing to do, Alice racked her brain, seriously considering the possibility of drawing a new comic. Not a plagiarized one, she felt she needed to find something to do in her boring daily life, such as creating some outrageous plotlines. Only when the pain of not creating exceeds the pain of creating will an artist begin to work. Note 1. Before Alice could be driven mad by boredom, she received a message from Archbishop Anthony. Thank goodness, the church and machinery hivemind had finished their negotiations. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Alice successfully met, 111 feet, the legendary magic mirror. Under Anthony's hesitant gaze, Alice curiously reached out and poked and patted the magic mirror. After fiddling with it for a while, a line of weak, blood-red text appeared on the mirror's surface. Great Miss Fate, do you have any questions you wish to ask? Alice silently pulled back her hand and turned to look at Anthony's expression. Good, as expected of someone who could become an archbishop, his expression management was excellent. Alice couldn't read any emotions from his face. It's probably not strange for this mirror to call me Miss Fate. Alice, with a complex mood, redirected her attention to the mirror, stroked her chin, and asked her first question. Is this considered your question? The text on erodes disappeared, and new text appeared. Yes, your previous question also counts. Alice nodded thoughtfully and asked her first proper question. Why isn't your number 2 to 333? She successfully plunged both Anthony and erodes into confusion. It took erodes a considerable amount of time to respond. Alice felt it might have lagged, but in any case, it responded as follows. Apart from 0 feet level sealed artifacts being common among the major churches, sealed artifacts of other levels are ranked according to their discovery time. When I was discovered by Machinery Hivemind, my danger level was classified as 2 feet, which is dangerous, and can be used cautiously and with restraint. At that time, Machinery Hivemind already had 110 feet 2 feet level sealed artifacts, so my number is 2 to 111. A formulaic answer that left no room for error. Alice remained silent for 2 seconds before realizing that erodes had successfully used one answer to make her lose interest in asking random questions, all without violating the rules. At this moment, erodes continued to speak. According to the rules, you need to answer one of my questions. This was something Alice had known all along. Although erodes's answer had dampened her enthusiasm, Alice still nodded indifferently. So erodes displayed new text. What does 333 feet mean? Alice, who had never seen erodes's sharp questioning, didn't notice the abnormality of these two questions. Although she thought such a question didn't quite fit a game of truth or dare and seemed a bit too boring, she accepted it well for now. After all, it was just the beginning. After a brief thought, Alice decided to fight fire with fire. She cleared her throat and tried to imitate a mechanical voice, answering in a completely fixed, flat tone and rhythm. This comes from the period of my life. The original 233 came from an emoji in a certain communication setting, where the number 233 image was of someone laughing so hard they were pounding the ground. Therefore, some people like to add 2333 when communicating with others to express amusement. As this habit evolved and spread, by the very end of my memory, people had already begun to use the number of threes after the 2 to indicate the degree of laughter. Anthony was now completely unable to control his strange gaze. He looked at Alice, belatedly realizing that this might be a way for her to vent her emotions. Quite peculiar. As for Rhodes, no one knew what it was feeling now. It was as silent as if it were dead, displaying a correct answer message before immediately playing dead. The good news was that this behavior did successfully vent Alice's emotions. She didn't do anything else, but instead, her eyes darted around, and she suddenly asked in a strange, exaggerated tone. Mirror, mirror, tell me, who is the most beautiful being in this world? This was clearly a recreation of a famous scene from Snow White. Alice merely changed woman to being. After all, Alice felt that the most beautiful being shouldn't be human. In response, Anthony remained puzzled, while Rhodes was half puzzled, half horrified, specifically manifested as a silver-white lightning bolt appearing out of thin air, illuminating the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral. To Alice's stunned gaze, that lightning bolt precisely and mercilessly struck Rhodes. End of chapter. Chapter 332. Chapter 15. Self-cultivation of a licking dog. Facing Alice's questioning gaze, Rhodes displayed a line of blood-red text, slightly lighter in color than before. Could you please stop asking such dangerous questions? Alice fell into contemplation. Although she hadn't thought too deeply when asking the question, Rhodes's reaction made Alice ponder her question seriously. Undoubtedly, the most beautiful existence in this world was the deity who controlled the authority of beauty. However, regrettably, the authority of beauty, for now, seemed to be scattered, much like fate. Perhaps authorities like secrecy, mind, and dream were also scattered, or rather, everyone's authorities were actually sewn together from a pile of rags. Therefore, Alice's question, in a sense, could also be understood as, in the domain of beauty, who possessed more authority. Clearly, Rhodes didn't dare to say a single word about it. All right, although she didn't get an answer, Rhodes's sincere attitude barely satisfied Alice. I'll try my best. The text on Rhodes trembled slightly, changing into new words. Thank you for your magnanimity. Alice accepted this praise without a hint of guilt and began to ask more normal questions. Do you know about a book with an ocean blue cover, that refers to itself as Cassandra? To outsiders, it seems to also have an honorific name, possibly derived from a soothsayer's Beander characteristic. Do you know what this book is actually doing? Alice's description was vague, but Rhodes did not perfunctorily answer the question because of it. Alice saw the image on the mirror shift, revealing a book with an ocean blue cover. The book was held by a pair of gloved hands, and the image revealed the full picture. The owner of the hands wore a black robe, and beneath the half-concealed hood was the face of a young woman. This woman had sharp features, and a very obvious knife scar over her right eye. Undoubtedly, this was Sylvia Mulroney. Alice recognized this face at once, and at the same time, Alice saw that on the book in Sylvia's arms, faint silver runes coalesced into a silver eye. This seemed to be some kind of signal, and Sylvia reached out and opened the book. Just as Alice wanted to see what would appear once it was opened, the image on the mirror vanished, and a line of text appeared on the mirror. Is this the book? Alice nodded, and then a new line of text appeared. It is acting as a soothsayer. Huh. Alice's mouth fell open in surprise. If you said Sylvia was acting as a soothsayer, Alice would definitely believe it. Miss Sylvia was simply as soothsayer as one could get, perfectly fitting Alice's stereotype of a soothsayer. But that book was acting as a soothsayer. What did it do? Wasn't it instigating Sylvia to pretend to be a god? No, is your soothsayer's acting method perhaps from the same series as the instigator next door? Alice didn't try to ask this question. Firstly, she was still too far from being a soothsayer, and asking about acting principles now might have a negative impact on her future acting. Secondly, it wasn't as if she wouldn't have another chance to see this mirror. But this didn't stop Alice from feeling deeply confused by Rhodes's answer. In retaliation, she decided to make Rhodes confused with her. You clearly don't have eyes, how did you see me nod? At this moment, Anthony had already learned to be a quiet backdrop, ignoring Alice's occasional strange questions. As long as Alice didn't ask questions like, how to make the goddess turn into her demonic wolf form for me to pet, he should be able to remain calm. Her question successfully made all the images and text on the mirror disappear. Immediately after, Alice was surprised to find that Erodes had become an ordinary mirror. It reflected the indoor scenery. Alice realized she might have asked a stupid question. As she was thinking about how to cover it up, the image on the mirror disappeared, and new text emerged. Regrettably, I am merely a mirror and cannot possess a pair of eyes as beautiful and filled with wisdom as yours. Fortunately, I am a mirror, and I can thus admire your eyes from such a close distance. Alice's mouth fell open in surprise. She swallowed her saliva, forcing back the curses and internet slang that she instinctively wanted to blurt out, and squeezed out a sentence from her throat. You're quite the smooth talker. Thank you for your praise. Erodes remained expressionless. Well, a mirror certainly wouldn't have an expression. At least, Alice didn't think she could discern a mirror's expression. Alice shook her head, determined to bypass this topic. What's your question? The text and images on the mirror disappeared. A full minute passed before a line of text slowly emerged. Who stole the Storm Church's donation box? Who is it again? Alice cautiously glanced at Archbishop Anthony next to her. He must have guessed the answer, right? Alice guiltily withdrew her gaze. It must have been Aemon. No, I can't lie. Alice gritted her teeth, her eyes firm as she said, it was an Amon's avatar. Of course, it was Amon's avatar. She stole it while disguised as Amon's avatar, so how could it not be Amon's avatar who stole it? Rounding up, that would be Aemon. No, never mind, that's rounding up a bit too much. So, how great am I? I can come up with such a brilliant answer. Alice's eyes flickered, then quickly became triumphant. She was almost eager to find someone to publicize her brilliant analysis. Her gaze swept around, looking at Archbishop Anthony and Erodes. She decided to keep quiet, she just felt it wasn't quite appropriate. Erodes didn't know Alice's mood, but at this moment, it displayed excellent professionalism. The text that popped up wasn't a dry, correct answer, but a sincere compliment. What a brilliant answer. It even showed several stick figures cheering and clapping together on the mirror. Now Alice could see the mirror's expression. This made Alice's eyes light up immediately. She stared at the mirror and blurted out, "You use emoji." For the last word, perhaps feeling that Chinese would be too awkward here, Alice used memes. Erodes clearly didn't understand this. It displayed a line of text on the mirror. Please forgive my foolishness and ignorance, I cannot comprehend your profound meaning. Chapter 333 Chapter 16 The New Peeping Tom. Alice tried to explain the meaning of the emoji with a troubled expression. It's conveying information through pictures or moving pictures. Like the one you just showed, or people with exaggerated expressions and movements, or animals. Anyway, there are many kinds, right? It was undoubtedly difficult to define something you commonly see and then describe it in a language you're not entirely familiar with. Alice stammered as she introduced the concept of emojis to Erodes. The good news was that Erodes seemed to understand her words, and a small figure bowing in thanks appeared on the mirror's surface. Alice looked at the bowing GIF and finally confirmed that Erodes was absolutely subtly, no, overtly flattering her. Recalling how the mirror had addressed her initially, Alice stroked her chin, glancing thoughtfully at the mirror, and chose her words carefully before asking. If I want to obtain Doom Shade's spirituality dust, what channels do I have? After a moment of silence, Erodes began projecting images. The first to appear was an eyeball-sized badge, bearing the symbols of fate and concealment. On the back of the badge were ancient Hermes words, hold this item, and you may join. This was something that fell from Lanruis's body. Alice's eyes widened, and then she remembered that the gathering time displayed on it was in January, and it had already passed. The second to appear was Leonard. Alice was not surprised. After all, he had a marauder angel as a pendant, so having channels seemed quite normal. The third to appear was Bernadette. This eldest daughter of Emperor Rosal had the entire Intis behind her. Her wealth and connections were countless. Thinking of this, Alice even felt a desire to rob her. The fourth to appear was Renette Tinacare, holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads. When Alice saw her, she realized her options were far more numerous than she had thought. The fifth image was more shocking to Alice. It was not a specific person or object, but a pattern of an Ouroboros. Alice was unsure if this referred to Ouroboros or Willosepton, or the extended meaning of life school of thought, but either way, it was not good news. The sixth image made Alice even more silent. It showed Alice a saint emblem of the night. From the appearance of the images, Alice suspected that Rhodes actually wanted to show not only the saint emblem of the night but also those of other churches. However, it seemed that, being beneath the St. Samuel Cathedral, it ultimately chose to respect its host. When the Aurora Order's cross symbol appeared, Alice felt that this mirror was a bit too bizarre. For a moment, she even wanted to ask Rhodes if the objects it referred to might also include Eamon and Adam. Such a question was impossible to voice. Alice pressed her tongue against her teeth, swallowing all sounds back. It seemed inappropriate to cover her mouth with her hand here. Mainly, Alice remembered that she still somewhat maintained an image in front of Archbishop Anthony, and there was Rhodes here. Could Rhodes see her past actions? Alice's gaze towards Rhodes suddenly became hesitant. She began to seriously consider the possibility of smashing the mirror to silence it. No, that wouldn't work. She'd have to pay for it. Alice clenched her fist, abandoning this dangerous thought, and refocused her attention on the images appearing in the mirror. The 8th image was finally a specific address. Alice realized that the subsequent ones would probably also be different addresses, so she interrupted Rhodes without hesitation. Enough, these are enough. With so many options, she would rather go find Will Ossepton than try to be self-reliant. If she had to say, at most she would curiously ask how a normal sequence 5 should deal with such things. Speaking of which, Will Ossepton, Alice suddenly remembered that her honorific name came from Will Ossepton. Recalling Eamon finding her using her honorific name, Alice gently frowned. Actually, she had another version of her honorific name. The one that unlucky fellow chanted that day was clearly related to her, but it was irrelevant. Alice knew one thing had to be put on the agenda. She had to change her honorific name before Will Ossepton was born. Unless she had already consumed the Sequence 2 potion by then, or Miss Fate had set the final duel for that time. Otherwise, Alice believed she had better change her honorific name in advance. So annoying. Alice glanced at Rhodes, seriously considering if it could help with choosing an honorific name. Perhaps she could ask Klein. He was almost Sequence 5. With a bit more effort, he should be able to become a saint by then. He should be able to, right? While Alice was searching her mind for anyone else she could bother, Rhodes posed its question. Great Miss Fate, could you take me away and give me to my great master? Alice froze for 2 seconds, then looked hesitantly at Archbishop Anthony beside her. Archbishop Anthony, whether he didn't grasp her meaning or grasped it too deeply, exited the room and closed the door behind him. Alice watched him leave with a blank stare, then belatedly murmured, I actually just wanted to ask what the cost of taking the mirror away was. She clicked her tongue and looked back at the mirror. Rhodes, as if knowing what she wanted to ask, displayed a line of text. You seem accustomed to calling Master Mr. Fool. No wonder. Alice felt a sudden realization, instantly understanding why Klein had recommended Rhodes to her. She nodded in satisfaction, then said in a formal tone. I have received your request. I will relay it to Mr. Fool. You can go back and await notification. The text on the mirror disappeared. 10 odd seconds later, a line of undiminished enthusiastic text reappeared. All right. Rhodes awaits your summons at any time. This is how to contact me. A complex pattern appeared on the mirror. Through the occult studies she had recently crammed, Alice recognized it as a symbol combining secrecy and prying. Isn't this a peeping Tom? Alice stared at the pattern, trying to memorize it. At the same time, Rhodes explained. This is a rune composed of corresponding symbolic figures and magical markings. As long as you are in Backland, writing it on paper is equivalent to notifying me to come. In city response, Alice raised an eyebrow, offering no comment. Instead, her eyes darted, and she asked a question she had been somewhat fixated on. Do you peek at Mr. Fool while he's bathing? End of chapter. Chapter 334 Chapter 17 The Restoration Spell. For a long time, no new words or pictures appeared on Rhodes's surface. Alice felt that Alice didn't know its current mood. But in any case, the last words on the mirror became a listless sentence. I am just a mirror. That made a lot of sense. No matter what a mirror did, people wouldn't think it was peeping. Alice accepted this reason. She patted the mirror, signaling it to ask a question quickly. The most difficult part appeared. After what seemed like an intense internal struggle, Rhodes finally displayed a line of text. Do you prefer ice cream with crushed nuts or ice cream with jam? Good question. Truth or dare without outsiders was bound to be boring. Alice's gaze swept around, realizing this boring fact. She didn't make things difficult for Rhodes. She just smiled and retorted, "Why can't I have both?" Rhodes popped up a surprised response, an unexpected answer. This sentence was accompanied by an animation of applause. Alice reached up to touch her chin, vaguely realizing that she might have corrupted the mirror. This was truly. Alice shook her head with a wandering gaze, then pretended to be calm and left the room, quickly walking out after negotiating with Archbishop Anthony. Alice's purpose for coming here was largely complete. She had no interest in asking again about the Raven Shadow Serpent's pathway, because she realized the answer would probably be similar. If she wasn't planning to catch it herself, then this was enough. Clearly, she didn't have such a plan for now. She quickly caught up with the people ahead, passing them without changing her expression, and continued forward. After successively passing several people, Alice's companions disappeared, replaced by various working professionals. Alice bypassed these and returned home, beginning to consider how to trick one or several of the people she saw that day into actively seeking her out for a transaction. In reality, the one she had the least need to be reserved with was probably the church. From the current situation, as long as she wasn't planning to repeatedly commit suicide to claim pensions, everything was negotiable with the church. If she had such a plan, she might need to talk to the goddess, or in common terms, call her parents. Alice didn't want such a thing to happen, so she temporarily had no plans to do so. She merely ranked the church's sequence options higher. Will Aucepton and the life school of thought, in Alice's opinion, were a completely terrible idea. Unless one day Will Aucepton or she herself understood fate as profoundly as Charlie King, there was no need to consider this matter. Comparatively, Eamon and Adam might be more feasible options. But Alice coldly tossed these two brothers out of her choices. Without actively seeking out Bernadette, she was left with two options, the seemingly brainless Leonard and Renette Tinecare, who was currently working as a messenger. After Leonard's image, both reliable and unreliable, flickered in Alice's mind for a second, Alice unhesitatingly set up the ritual to summon a messenger. Miss Renette Tinecare, carrying 4 heads, appeared in the air. She looked at Alice, and her 4 heads asked in turn, "Do you need a letter sent?" The last head managed to snatch a syllable to conclude. Alice looked at these 4 heads, which seemed to have their own consciousnesses, and realized this was probably not good news. This angel's heads didn't seem very obedient. Perhaps she truly needed a 5th head. In any case, her 4 heads at least shouldn't have their own consciousnesses. Alice glanced at the messenger lady's heads and asked thoughtfully, "Did you encounter a problem with your advancement? Or some other reason?" The messenger lady seemed to realize something from Alice's attitude. She didn't answer Alice's question, but instead re-asked the previous one. "Do you need a messenger?" Alice looked at the last head, which again only managed to snatch a single syllable, and remained silent for 2 seconds. Then she suddenly asked seriously, "How do you decide which head holds the envelope and money?" She didn't ask how Renette Tinecare's 4 heads arranged their speaking order, because they clearly followed a sequential arrangement. But this question was enough to make Renette Tinecare crash. She was silent for a while before replying. "No, deliberate arrangement, each time is random." How could it truly be random? Alice shook her head, but didn't argue the point. Instead, she quickly moved on to the serious topic. "I actually want to talk to you, discuss a transaction. If I need you to help me hunt a creature in the spirit world, what do you require as compensation?" "This creature is called a doom shade. Alice recounted the characteristics of the doom shade that she knew one by one. After Renette Tinecare listened carefully to Alice's description, she proposed what she wanted. "I need a method to temporarily recover my strength." A method to temporarily recover strength. This wasn't difficult. Alice actually knew how to do it. Just as Klein said, that almost locked state effect could actually do many things. For example, she could directly summon a person's peak state and maintain it for a period. Describing this specifically as a certain ability didn't seem appropriate, it was more about the development of the application of authority. Her first attempt at doing something similar was when she crushed the marionettist Beander characteristic and the wealth accessory provided by Klein. The so-called angel-level response was actually a very vague concept, but Alice had to admit that, no matter what, her attack power was truly pathetic. Crushing it with brute force was clearly not advisable, so she could only consider it from the perspective of authority. After much deliberation, Alice briefly summoned the state of these two items when they were first condensed into Beander characteristics. Her thoughts returned to the present. Alice looked at Renette Tinecare and frowned slightly. This request wasn't actually difficult for her. She just needed to create a few talismans through a ritual. The only troublesome part was the materials to carry the talismans. Thinking of this, Alice smiled calmly. I can provide talismans with similar effects, but you need to prepare both the materials and the ritual yourself. I am only responsible for responding to the ritual. Chapter 335 Chapter 18 Inches Let's talk about it tomorrow, and decision-making difficulties. Alice's skilled act of shifting blame was declared a success. Renette Tinecare readily accepted it and, with a good attitude, inquired about the corresponding ritual. Alice replied to her, Go ask Gehrman Sparrow. After, as usual, dumping the troublesome matter on Klein, Alice began to ponder what truly interested her. Speaking of which, the charm should be given a name, right? Renette Tinecare's four heads all nodded simultaneously. Alice immediately decided to take on this important task. I'm good at this. Since it's a charm used to restore one to their peak level of yesterday, why not call it, tomorrow? Renette Tinecare's four heads, in a rare display of agreement, said in unison. Is it that strange? Compared to the names I've given before, this one should seem much more normal to others, right? Could it be that Reynard thinks it's too hasty? Alice looked at Reynard with a puzzled expression, then thought for a moment and said. Will this be a bit too hasty? Let's be a little more serious. Tomorrow, let's just call it, talk about it tomorrow. Renette Tinecare's four heads simultaneously showed puzzled expressions. It's decided. Alice snapped her fingers. Talk about it tomorrow, this name clearly sounds like something I'd come up with. No one else could possibly create such a distinctive name. This was a topic that left one unsure how to respond. After 2 seconds of silence, Renette Tinecare proactively suggested. I will find Doom Shade. Only then did Alice remember the beginning of this transaction. She waved her hand and said. No rush. Do you mind answering a question for me first? The four heads vied to speak. What question? Clearly, this was a failed negotiation. The two heads that didn't get to speak looked very distressed. Seeing this, Alice quickly initiated a new conversation. I don't understand, does Doom Shade have some easily exploitable yet fatal weakness? Otherwise, a normal winner wouldn't be able to fight such a thing. Or rather, wouldn't be able to hit it. Although she hadn't seen it herself, Edwina's description made Alice suspect that Doom Shade was a bizarre creature that would kill you if you touched it, but was impossible to hit. This wasn't a baseless guess. Alice felt that she was similar. Easy to kill but hard to catch. She reasonably speculated that this might be a characteristic of the entire pathway. Renette Tinecare didn't know what Alice was thinking. Her four heads took turns explaining. Few people know that Doom Shade relies on instinct to find its habitat. It doesn't have much subjective thought itself. This leads to a situation where, when two or more habitats with extremely similar conditions appear, Doom Shade finds it difficult to choose and falls into a dilemma. And Doom Shade's body is not stable. At first, Alice tried to make eye contact with each head as it spoke, her gaze constantly flitting between the four heads. But under the relay race of the four heads, speaking one word at a time, Alice quickly couldn't keep up. She let her gaze fall on Renette Tinecare's empty neck. So uncomfortable, such a strange feeling, Alice stared blankly ahead, seriously considering how to transform Renette Tinecare into a more human-like appearance. Otherwise, chatting like this was too difficult. Alice forced herself to shift her attention to Renette Tinecare's words, listening carefully to her description of Doom Shade, then fell into contemplation. So, Alice organized her thoughts. It agonizes itself to death due to indecision. Indecision was also not a term belonging to this era. Renette Tinecare took some effort to understand Alice's meaning. She nodded her four heads. Alice watched this strange scene in silence for a second, then looked up at Reynard's empty neck and said with a serious expression. Can you put another head on your neck? Even a fake one would work, you can just nod that head from now on. This request was somewhat bizarre. Renette Tinaker's gaze towards Alice was filled with confusion and bewilderment. Reynard perhaps should have been angry, but Alice apologized quickly. Sorry. I just have indecision, just like Doom Shade. She apologized rapidly the moment Renette Tinaker's gaze turned cold, then covered her mouth with her hand, looking over with a pitiful expression. The impression accumulated over so long instantly collapsed. Renette Tinaker immediately realized why Alice always gave her a strange feeling. Her status and psychological age were severely mismatched. She was clearly a child. It was useless to reason with a child. Renette Tinaker evidently understood this. She merely glanced at Alice and then vanished from the spot. Alice breathed a sigh of relief. She lowered her hand from her mouth, patted her chest twice, and let out a long breath. She murmured, "Good thing Reynard didn't mind, though even if Reynard did, Reynard couldn't really do anything to me." Meanwhile, Klein, who had just finished scrubbing a toilet, was enduring the sweat about to drip from his forehead. He didn't want to wipe sweat with the hand he had just used to scrub a toilet. If only Alice were here, then I definitely wouldn't have this kind of trouble. No, never mind, it's better if she's not here. Klein imagined the scene of a freshly scrubbed toilet becoming dirty again and rationally abandoned his longing for Alice. He took a breath, carried the brush to the next toilet, and was about to continue his struggle when suddenly his spirituality stirred. He lightly clicked his teeth, activating his spirit vision. Renette Tinaker appeared abruptly, but the mouths of her four heads were all empty, none of them were holding a letter. Under Klein's puzzled gaze, the four golden-haired, red-eyed heads spoke in succession. Your daughter's home education has a big problem. Klein immediately began to cough violently. What he was most grateful for was that, during his month-long acting career, he had gradually adapted to the smell here and no longer needed to hold his breath to scrub toilets. Otherwise, his face would surely look terrible right now. But even so, it was bad enough. Klein forcibly used the clown Beander ability to stop his coughing, then said with a trembling voice. Where do I have a daughter? If she were my daughter, I would have beaten her long ago. Clearly, he knew who Renette Tinaker was referring to. End of chapter. Chapter 336 Chapter 19 Pension. Renette Tinaker ignored Klein's roar of anger, and in an unchanging tone, she recounted what Alice had done. She asked me if she could attach a fake head to her neck, and from now on, when she nodded, she would use that one. It was indeed something Alice would do. Klein looked at Renette Tinaker with a pained expression, apologizing for Alice. Don't take it seriously, she's just a little. Klein tried hard to find an excuse for Alice but found no particularly suitable one apart from her age. But if he used age as an excuse, Klein uneasily touched his lower abdomen. Under the Faceless's ability, there was no abnormal bulge there, not even any flab. He exhaled in relief, then looked with hesitant eyes at Renette Tinaker, who neither continued speaking nor showed any intention of leaving, and tried to explain further. She's just a child, she'll be fine when she grows up. His tone was full of uncertainty. Renette Tinaker's four red eyes swept over Klein, finally coalescing into a single sentence. She didn't pay gold coins. At this moment, Klein finally briefly empathized with Renette Tinaker's anger. He coldly paid 1 gold coin, then continued scrubbing the toilet. That evening, Alice received the video of Renette Tinaker's visit, edited by Klein, along with a voice message. Alice, you've gone too far. Alice was silent, Alice hesitated, Alice pondered repeatedly, and finally replied with a message. Quote, When you say, gone too far, are you referring to what I said, or that I didn't pay? She had stared at Renette Tinaker's final action of demanding gold coins from Klein in thought for a long time, ultimately realizing that the clown's Beander ability was exceptionally useful for concealing inner thoughts. Their conversation eventually unfolded above the gray fog, with Klein asking first, what did you want Renette Tinaker for? Alice thought for a moment, organizing her words. I'm looking for sequence 4 potion ingredients. You should know about this, right? I entrusted the church to borrow the erodes you mentioned from the machinery hivemind. Oh, right, I almost forgot. Alice slapped her head, remembering Erodes's request that she had forgotten. Erodes hopes you'll take it from the steam church. Well, that's definitely troublesome, let's talk about it later. Mainly, it gave me a symbol. Alice materialized the symbol, a blend of secrecy and prying, and explained. Rhodes said that as long as this symbol is written on paper in Backland, it's equivalent to notifying him to come over. Whether he would use it or not, Klein noted down the symbol. At the same time, he also realized that Alice had most likely witnessed Rhodes's peculiar attitude. He looked at Alice somewhat sheepishly, asking tentatively, "Did Rhodes say anything else to you? What do you wish Rhodes to say to you?" Alice asked. "My great master, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the esteemed." Ah! Klein quickly jumped up and covered Alice's mouth, and in Alice's astonished gaze, he gritted his teeth and said, "Shut up. The great Li Ying Shang Angelina Sakura Snow Feather. What was after that again?" "I don't remember." Alice pulled Klein's hand away, answering honestly, "It was just made up of those words arranged and combined." Then, she paused, licked her lips, and looked at Klein's hand with hesitant eyes. It was right there, so why not? Before she could put her thoughts into action, Klein snatched his hand back with lightning speed. "Were you trying to bite me just now?" he asked. "It was right there." Alice mumbled in defense. Klein's mouth twitched. Realizing that Alice was once again disconnected, he decisively ignored the matter and steered the conversation back to the original question. "Never mind, why were you looking for Renette Tinacare again? I remember you didn't finish earlier." "Oh, right." Alice also remembered their unfinished topic. "I got clues about the doomed shade from Rhodes, and one of them was Renette Tinacare, plus she once tried to ask me for help." "Wait," Klein interrupted Alice, "tried to ask you for help?" Alice nodded, saying, "Yes, she did. It should count as asking for help, although she was rejected by me before she could even state her true purpose. Anyway, she agreed to help me kill one, and after it's done, I'll help her create charms that can temporarily restore her state." "Hey, didn't she ask you about the ritual content?" "You're giving this kind of thing to me again?" Klein asked somewhat uncertainly. "This is my trust in you." Alice straightened up slightly. "This kind of thing is usually entrusted to a favored one. What kind of god acts like you?" Klein rolled his eyes at Alice. I suspect she was so angry she forgot. Alice silently lowered her head. Klein watched this scene and shook his head, proactively changing the subject for her. "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" Alice began to seriously recall her experiences during this period. Besides Cassandra, there didn't seem to be anything special. "Oh, right." Alice suddenly looked up and asked Klein hesitantly. "Who do you think claimed my pension after I died? If no one claimed it, can I go back and claim it?" A path he had never imagined. Klein's mouth dropped open in surprise, and he asked hesitantly, "Why didn't you claim it before?" "I didn't think of it before." Alice stammered. "What did the goddess say?" Klein continued to ask. Alice was silent for 2 seconds, then cautiously said, "I don't know. I don't dare to ask." "Then I don't know either." Klein spread his hands. "However, the pension." Alice's words successfully brought their memories back to Tingen City. Compared to Alice, who was like a rootless tumbleweed in this era, Klein had never forgotten his family there. He knew that no matter what, he could never reunite with Benson and Melissa, that would only bring them endless danger. A heavy atmosphere gradually spread, and even Alice, uncharacteristically, bit her lip. Klein looked at the suddenly quiet Alice, but slowly curved his lips into a smile. "Huh. Look on the bright side, at least my pension wasn't wasted." End of chapter. Chapter 337 Chapter 20 Klein's Mother. This was actually Alice's unique way of thinking and speaking. Alice felt nothing when she did it, but when Klein said it out loud, Alice suddenly felt a little suffocated inside. "You're smiling so horribly." Alice looked up, quickly glanced at Klein, then lowered her head again. "He seems to be sad." What should I do?" Alice realized she had no experience in this area at all. Usually, her only experience in similar situations was to hold her stomach and laugh heartily. Alice felt she should comfort Klein, but her closest line of comfort had already been said by Klein, and it had the opposite effect. This left Alice completely at a loss for what to do. After a moment of hesitation, she tried to change the subject. I need your help with something. I want to change my honorific name before Will Osepton is born. Can you help me think of one?" Although she had originally planned to dump this task on Klein, Alice had initially thought she could delay it, as Will Osepton's due date was at least in June or July. Hey, can I change his birthday? In mysticism, a birth date holds significant meaning. Moreover, the birth date Will Osepton chose for himself must have been meticulously selected. For a snake of fate, changing such a thing wouldn't irrevocably seal anything, but it would definitely be enough to disgust him. Alice, who had only mentioned it casually, suddenly began to consider the feasibility of this matter. Changing her honorific name before Will Osepton is born. Alice's words successfully pulled Klein back from his complex thoughts. He calculated the possible due date and realized it was indeed around June or July. Only a few months left, it's urgent. Klein frowned, realizing that this matter was already pressing. He had completely detached himself from his emotions and focused his attention on Alice. Therefore, he resumed his parental education. Are you planning to ask me for help? You're clearly intending to dump everything on me. Something like an honorific name should at least be thought of by yourself. Klein held back, ultimately not bringing up the fact that Alice had previously just used the honorific name Will Osepton had given her. He always felt he was becoming more and more like a qualified mother. Alice lowered her head guiltily, then argued in a very loud voice. I've already changed it. A few days ago, some unlucky guy chanted an honorific name by mistake and it pointed to me, and I didn't even use it directly. At most, I was just going to copy some from it. Chanting an honorific name by mistake and it pointed to her. This kind of thing isn't uncommon, but should one say this guy was lucky or unlucky? It should still be relatively lucky, at least Alice probably wouldn't mess around too much. Probably not, right? Klein suddenly hesitated. He looked at Alice with uncertainty. What did you do? Alice blinked, and said as if it were obvious, of course I responded to his prayer. Klein immediately recalled Alice's terrifying comprehension ability. He asked nervously, how did you respond? What did you do? Alice looked at him confusedly and explained, the content of his prayer made me not understand what he wanted me to do, so I asked him what form of help he needed. Klein fell into deep thought. Then he ran away. Alice added the conclusion of the whole affair. No kidding, if it were me, I'd run too. But running away might not even help, right? Klein looked at Alice with mixed feelings, shook his head, and felt somewhat relieved. At least she now asks people what they're actually thinking. This way, at most it's a bit scary, but it's not as likely to cause big problems. Klein comforted himself a few times in his heart before asking Alice. So what happened to that person later? I saw him run to the church. Alice muttered, then I didn't bother with it. Wow, she's really made great progress. I should praise her, but I can't let her get too complacent. Klein concentrated for a moment, then smiled and said to her. That's great. It would be even better if one day when you respond to others like that, you don't scare them. Alice clenched her right fist and rested it against her chin, beginning to ponder. Klein looked at her expression and reminded her. Even if you plan for me to create an honorific name for you, you can't just let me think blindly. Do you have any deeds with strong directional meaning? The previous phrase, reaper of desserts and ice cream, popped into Alice's mind. That was a joke, of course, but Alice did remember something. That, at least the current ice cream, the earliest version, was made according to my description. Can this work? It counts as something with strong directional meaning, although it's a bit strange. Klein nodded. Besides that, you can also consider it from the perspective of abilities or authorities. Abilities. Alice paused, remembering the prophecy ability she had kept hidden. Klein had basically seen all her other abilities, and those he hadn't seen wouldn't be a big problem. Only this prophecy. Should she tell him? Alice pursed her lips, lowered her head as if in thought, and murmured. In the previous versions, incarnation of luck and miracles and origin of calamity and chaos were descriptions of abilities and authority. In the version that person chanted, master of luck and misfortune, and the inevitability of all coincidences were also descriptions of abilities and authority. Then, eternally innocent child, and a slumbering goddess of fate, should both be pointing to me. Have I told you? Never mind, I'll say it again. The winner's ability is simply to bestow misfortune, but a sequence 4 misfortune mage can actually bear the title, Master of Luck and Misfortune. At least, that's how I see it. Because a misfortune mage doesn't simply bestow and remove misfortune, but can specifically determine what kind of misfortune, and how likely it is to occur. The essence of fate seems to be controlling the probability of things happening. That's about it. You can compose it based on this. She ultimately didn't reveal the truth about prophecy. Klein didn't notice Alice's concealment, or rather, the image Alice presented made him never think she might conceal something. Wasn't she always straightforward? See, in just a few sentences, she completely sold out the honorific name that Unlucky Guy had chanted. Controlling the probability of things happening. No wonder it's called the inevitability of all coincidences. What about before? Klein recalled Admiral Emlyn's pants falling down in front of his brother. End of this chapter. Chapter 338, Chapter 21, Goodwill. With his experience playing Admiral Emlyn as a reference, Klein almost immediately understood Alice's words. It meant that a winner could only make him unlucky, but a misfortune mage could decide whether his pants fell down, he choked on water, or he tripped on flat ground. No wonder every incident he encountered those few days was embarrassingly just right. Klein gritted his teeth and looked at Alice, meeting her innocent big eyes, and gave a gentle and amiable smile. His smile is so scary. Alice leaned back in her chair, nervously shrinking her neck. Alice let her eyes well up with tears, bit her lip, and looked at Klein with her eyes half raised, saying timidly, "I know I was wrong. I won't dare to do it again next time, Klein. ... She's so practiced at admitting fault." Klein's eye twitched, and he asked with a complicated expression, "You actually don't even know why I'm angry, do you?" Alice's voice stopped abruptly. She lowered her head and sat up straight, her calves nervously wiggling twice before she pressed them tightly together. "It really is. Forget it. Anyway, she was just playing a prank, and nothing major happened." Klein glanced at Alice, quite speechless, and chose not to argue with her. After all, what did Admiral Emlyn's pants falling down have to do with him, Klein? Giving Alice a perfunctory glare, Klein kindly reminded her, "Those problems I encountered while playing Emlyn, that was you, wasn't it?" "It wasn't me," Alice said firmly, "it was your bad luck." "Oh, really?" Klein sneered, the master of luck and misfortune. But this time, Alice was exceptionally confident and self-righteous. "It was your bad luck to begin with. There's no way I can make something happen 100%, even then, accidents can still occur. This is written in the uniqueness. The door pathway, starting from sequence 4, allows control over the probability of events occurring. However, in reality, even if the probability is 100%, it doesn't necessarily mean it will happen. Similarly, even if the probability is 0, it doesn't mean an event cannot happen, much like the probability of exactly selecting a point on a plane. Note 1. Klein, hearing this theory for the first time, was clearly surprised, but Alice's demeanor clearly indicated she wasn't lying. Her confident, guilty, and feigned resolute expressions when talking nonsense were all very obvious. If he were to go by Alice's words, it could indeed be understood as him not having enough luck to break the 100% taboo. What a load of nonsense. Realizing this, Klein forgot his earlier intention not to argue with Alice and glared at her. "So you adjusted the probability to 100%. Alice lowered her head again. Although there were certain limitations to adjusting the probability of events, she couldn't set every future without limits. Moreover, as she just said, even at 100%, accidents could still occur. But none of this changed the fact that Alice made Mr. Fool's pants fall down 100% in front of his brother, and clearly, that's what Klein was bothered by. Alice realized this matter couldn't be resolved by sophistry, it was an undeniable fact. She gave up explaining and just looked at Klein with pitiful eyes. Klein had developed full immunity to this trick. He ignored Alice's expression but didn't argue with her. Instead, he looked at her and began to ponder her new honorific name. After all, what normal person would spread their teachings outside using an honorific name made up by their enemy? Especially since Alice and Will Ossepton had irreconcilable differences. Alice had no choice, and at least so far, Will Ossepton had no intention of spitting out the sequence 1 Beander characteristic. He had been silent for too long, and Alice called out to him, somewhat nervously. "Klein, you're really angry." Klein stopped thinking, looked up at the cautious Alice, and a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Could I pretend to be very angry to trick her into not doing such things in the future? This thought lingered in his mind for a while. Klein went through a difficult internal struggle and finally gave up the idea under the warning of his spirituality. He always felt that if Alice ever discovered such a thing, the consequences would be terrifying. He looked at the increasingly nervous Alice, rubbed his brow, and said with a headache, "To be honest, I'm almost used to it. However, Alice, play is play, but before you act, it's best to think about whether you can actually solve the trouble you cause, okay? Just like with the Saint Fuerin. Although nothing happened in the end, can you guarantee that nothing will happen every time? Adjusting the probability to 100% is useless, isn't it?" Alice lowered her head. The news that all crew members and passengers of the Saint Fuerin miraculously survived had already spread. Alice was certain this wasn't the work of Hermit Catlia, or at least not solely. Because the news spread beyond Byam, Alice even read related newspapers in Backland, as a curious anecdote. The entire incident, along with the ritual site at the ticketing company, spread. Alice even had a whim to go see the doorman who had heard her prophecy that day. At the time, he was drunk and incoherently bragging to those around him. This strange encounter popularized the witnessed ritual site. The matter spread before the authorities could try to conceal it, and the families of those tourists and crew members coincidentally learned about it, yes, coincidentally. In fact, some of the tourists' and crew members' families had even begun to secretly thank and praise her, and some tried to pray for safety on their next sea voyage. If not for the lack of a clear direction, she would probably have true believers. This method of achieving a certain outcome through numerous coincidences quickly reminded Alice of Ince Zangwill, whom she had almost forgotten, and 008. Clearly, in Tingen City, things seemed to have unfolded similarly. But this certainly wasn't a benevolent act by Ince Zangwill, who had somehow lost his mind. If anyone had truly intervened, it was at most Adam's goodwill. But Alice wasn't interested. She was even too lazy to divine, mainly because, if it really was Adam, and Adam met her gaze in the divinatory vision, that glance had left too great a psychological shadow on her. She wasn't afraid of Adam to the point of incapacitation, but she genuinely didn't want to divine about Adam. As for whether this was a gesture of goodwill, doesn't he have a mouth? Alice decided to adhere to her consistent principle: if others don't ask, she'll pretend not to know anything. End of chapter. Chapter 339 Chapter 22 Mr. Fool, you don't want to. She hadn't spoken for so long that Klein stared at her for 2 seconds, confirming she was zoning out again. He couldn't help but wave his hand in front of her and call out, "Alice." "Ah," Alice snapped back, where were we just now?" After 2 seconds of silence, Klein asked with a strange tone, "Are all beyonders of the fate pathway so prone to zoning out?" "Maybe." Alice's tone was slightly hesitant. "Maybe. How strange, I've barely met any from the same pathway. Or maybe I haven't paid much attention to the low and mid-sequence pathways." This was clearly possible. Although the Beyonder characteristic aggregation had a more noticeable effect on high-sequence Beyonders, the 3 peak Beyonders of the fate pathway were all in Backland, so there were probably many low and mid-sequence ones as well. Regrettably, Alice wasn't Aemon. She had no interest in consuming low and mid-sequence Beyonder characteristics. Klein accepted Alice's explanation. He shook his head and repeated his previous words. "Alice, next time, before making a decision, remember to think about whether you have a way to clean up the mess." "Okay." Alice's movements paused slightly. She rarely considered the consequences. After all, while she wasn't entirely indifferent to others, her level of care only went as far as politeness. Alice's biggest concern was merely upsetting Klein, so she didn't voice her true thoughts but instead nodded, seriously agreeing to the matter. She really should consider which troubles wouldn't make Klein too angry, like Admiral Emlyn's pants falling down. Klein was the type who was a little angry but not truly angry, because he cared a little but not that much. After all, it wasn't his own reputation that was ruined. Alice blinked, realizing she might be able to judge such things by the degree to which Klein cared. Alice's attitude was, for the time being, quite serious. As for other things, Klein no longer cared why she was serious. Such matters should be left to professional teachers. In any case, Klein decided to end this topic. After Alice left the gray fog, he would continue to be her mother. No, continue to be her father, that's not right either. He would continue to think of new honorific names for Alice. After all, he couldn't really let her live with the honorific name Will Ossepton came up with forever. Since that's the case, we might as well be decisive and just have Eamon make up an honorific name next time. To avoid constantly suspecting whether there was a problem with the honorific name. Alice. Alice was zoning out again. After quickly making her decision, she began to ponder how to tell Mr. Fool that Erodes had spied on him showering. Actually, Alice understood that Erodes most likely wasn't doing it intentionally, it might just be a side effect. For example, Erodes might have even seen its great master cleaning the toilet at some point. Klein knew from Alice's expression that she was zoning out again. He quietly got up, used the meander ability of the clown to make himself completely silent, tiptoed towards Alice, then slapped her shoulder hard and asked loudly, "Alice. What are you thinking about?" Alice shrieked and jumped up from her chair. After realizing it was Klein, she threw herself back into the chair, kicking the ground and saying, "I was just zoning out, do you have to scare me like that?" Klein glanced at Alice and reminded her, "If it were you, you'd probably even remove the chair, wouldn't you?" Alice closed her mouth. A few seconds later, she opened it to defend herself. "No, I would remove the chair when you were about to sit down." She paused, licked her teeth with her tongue, then revealed a sweet smile, drawing out her words, "By the way, Mr. Fool, be extra careful next time you shower." Quote. Klein shivered, looking at Alice with a puzzled expression. Alice showed a mysterious smile and said softly, "Mr. Fool, you wouldn't want me to watch a live stream of you showering from Erodes, would you?" Klein's mouth dropped open in surprise. Seeing this, Alice's smile became even more gentle and kind, her voice so sweet it seemed to drip with honey. She spoke to Klein in that soft tone, "Mr. Fool, you must be careful when you're alone, and definitely don't do anything that can't be seen by others." After staring at Alice's smiling face for 2 seconds, Klein unhesitatingly bent his index finger and sharply flicked Alice's head. "Go eat your ice cream," he said. "Unless you plan to come up with an honorific name yourself." This accurately hit Alice's weak spot. She silently lowered her head and mumbled, "I was just kidding. I wouldn't really go watch, unless I restarted, and was a boy. Hey, what's it like to be a man? And a demoness?" Klein reached out and covered Alice's mouth. Alice blinked in confusion, looking up at him, and heard his voice, tinged with a hint of collapse. "Alice, you are not allowed to do such things, do you hear me?" Alice blinked, pulled Klein's hand away, and asked, "Why?" "I'm afraid one day you'll ask me what a faceless tastes like," Klein said expressionlessly, retracting his hand. "After all, demoness is just the beginning." "Ah." Alice blinked twice, bewildered. "Even if I were curious, I'd go find other faceless people." "I know you can't." Klein reached out and covered her mouth again. "I think," Klein said, looking at Alice with a complicated expression, "you might need to understand what kind of topics are not suitable for discussion for most people who are thinking." He could tell that Alice was genuinely discussing the issue very seriously, genuinely wanting to know what it felt like to be a boy. "But," Alice bit her lip, "you are not most people, you are." She paused, thought for a few seconds, then said decisively, "You are my birth mother, separated for many years, with no blood relation." Note 1. Klein felt he couldn't understand Alice again. He tried hard to think, "No, you didn't restart in my belly." But Alice tried to explain her reasoning. "Besides parents, I can't think of anyone who would do everything for me like this. You know that too." Klein's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but ask, "Then why isn't it father?" Alice rubbed her chin and said, "Probably because, in human perception, usually, mother is the one who takes care of the children." End of chapter. Chapter 340. Chapter 23. Tragedy. The conversation ended with Alice being sent away. Alice, who had been sent back to the real world, kicked the floor indignantly, then sighed and lay quietly on the bed. "It seems, I don't know what to do again," Alice murmured, wishing she could sleep until the end of the story. "Why can't I skip the battle scenes? Even if I can't skip battles, why can't I skip the daily plot?" Not knowing what to do, Alice sighed sadly and decided to go eat ice cream. Klein, who didn't want to continue talking to Alice, finally sent her away. At night, after a busy day, Klein began to concentrate on, thinking of an honorific name for Alice. The inventor of ice cream. No, if I write that, she'll probably complain. Let's try to rephrase it. If all the descriptions are positive, will her personality improve? This had nothing to do with mysticism. The thought just popped into Klein's head because he knew Alice had a bit of an idol's burden. Although Alice often exposed the truth due to various accidents, it must be mentioned that when everyone thought she was a good person or very capable, she did tend to maintain her image. So calling her Great Miss Fate could actually make her feel better, provided it wasn't said to her face. Klein thought carefully, deliberating for a long time, then picked up his pen and wrote the first sentence on the paper. Creator of happiness and miracles. Eating ice cream is also a happy thing, right? After writing this sentence, Klein glanced at the sky outside, shook his head, and put down his pen. Time to sleep early. I still have to continue volunteering tomorrow, and her habit of having others do everything for her isn't good. I need to leave some things for her to do. Thinking this, Klein put down his pen again. Alice saw Renette Tinecare again on Thursday morning. As she happily took the ice cream, she suddenly felt a chill down her spine for a moment. It was like the ice cream vendor was Amen, that kind of chill. Well, it wasn't that cold, actually. Alice silently activated her spirituality vision, confirmed Renette Tinecare's location, and then, holding her ice cream, planned to find a secluded spot. This location wasn't suitable for conversation, and Renette Tinecare also realized this. She followed Alice back to her nearby home, watched Alice close the door and sit on the sofa, and then, Alice started eating ice cream. Renette Tinecare looked at Alice, who was engrossed in her ice cream, feeling a faint sense of bewilderment. It wasn't until Alice had scooped out half a cup of ice cream that she finally confirmed she was being ignored. Alice. Renette Tinecare tried to speak up to assert her presence. Alice looked up at her, blinked twice, then said, I almost forgot. What do you, Doomshade, anyway, wait until I finish eating first. Saying this, she scooped another spoonful of ice cream into her mouth. Renette Tinecare suddenly felt a deep sense of powerlessness. She looked at Alice, then at herself, questioning the meaning of her own existence. How could someone like this be an angel? She didn't understand. She decided to talk to the child's guardian again. Alice didn't know what Renette Tinecare was thinking. She slowly finished the rest of her ice cream before curiously looking at Renette Tinecare and asking, Did you find the doom shade? A powdery substance appeared on the table. This black powder seemed to reflect light faintly, and Alice curiously tried to catch the flickering specks of light within it. The faint specks of light drew Alice's attention. She unconsciously focused on them, her scattered thoughts seemingly disappearing for a brief moment. She became exceptionally calm and concentrated, with only the shimmering dust in her eyes. The flickering dust made it extremely difficult to catch the light. Alice tried several times, finding that she always missed her target perfectly, like a cat trying to catch a laser pointer. But Alice was not a pet cat being teased. She simply spread her spirituality, encompassing all the dust at once, solving all the problems. The moment Alice finally grasped the elusive speck of light she had yearned for, a scene broke free from it and appeared within her spirituality. Alice saw a woman, sitting by what looked like a door, scrubbing clothes. Beside her was a young girl. Alice had seen such scenes before, in Backland's East Borough, in the legendary slums, where many women made a living this way. If they couldn't survive like this, the next step would be to become a streetwalker. But such families usually had no father, or rather, no male, no primary laborer of that era. And in this scene, there was indeed a male. The man stumbled back from outside, his gait telling Alice that he was definitely drunk. Alice saw him kick over the laundry basin. He cursed something, and the woman, who seemed to be the mother figure, meekly bowed her head and listened. After listening for a while, the little girl finally couldn't hold back. She angrily raised her head and retorted. It must have been a retort, because the man visibly grew angrier. He angrily kicked the little girl. The mother lunged to shield her child. Alice couldn't hear any sound, but she could almost imagine the suffocating cries and screams. But Alice was very rational at this moment. She calmly continued to observe, watching the beating end, watching the man leave, watching the little girl fall onto her dying mother, in pain, and finally, with anger, climb back to her feet. Of course, they couldn't afford a doctor, so after an unknown period, the mother took her last breath, her body slowly growing cold. The little girl held her mother's corpse, expressionlessly burying her. This was just the beginning. The second scene appeared. Alice couldn't clearly see the little girl's features, but from her figure, she seemed to have grown quite a bit, her slender body even gaining a graceful quality. Alice suddenly had a bad premonition, and it quickly came true. In the next scene, the father received a few banknotes from someone. The aftermath of this event could seemingly be imagined, but in the corner of the scene, even the father didn't notice that his daughter was watching this with cold eyes. Alice, however, instantly fell out of that rational, calm state. She saw that little girl, who should now be a young woman. In the child's arms, she held a book with an ocean blue cover. End of chapter. Chapter 341. Chapter 24. Did you make up this ritual? Alice, who had originally been casually watching, became focused. The girl clutching the book tried to escape, but she was too young, and her intentions couldn't be hidden from her terrible father. She was discovered the moment she tried to flee. How could she have been discovered? That book, a thought of unease flashed through Alice's mind, and the subsequent scene changed her perception. She was discovered in the middle of the night, the girl clutching the book, sneaking out of the house, carefully unlocking the door. She would occasionally glance in a certain direction, which Alice guessed was where her father was. As it was her first time doing something like this, the girl's movements couldn't hide her nervousness, yet they were steady and methodical. Her hands were extremely stable, not making any undue noise from trembling. The door lock was finally opened, and standing outside to greet her was her father. The girl's father slowly raised his right hand, and Alice saw that it was a cleaver. The girl retreated a few steps in horror, her body trembling uncontrollably. The man, holding the cleaver high, approached, and the girl carefully backed away, when suddenly, she lost her footing and tripped to the ground. Behind her was a broken table with 4 legs of uneven length and a pitted surface. The man reached out and picked up the girl like a chick. Alice felt he should have had a fitting expression at that moment, like a sneer or something, but unfortunately, she couldn't see his face or hear any sound. The man's right hand was still holding the cleaver high. He looked like he was saying something, probably lines of threats or reprimands. After all, she was sold for money, so scaring her was enough. Why would he actually kill her? It was at this moment that all objects in the scene simultaneously shook violently. Alice was unsure whether the scene itself was shaking or the things within it. It wasn't until the next moment, when the flimsy house finally collapsed in the shaking, its roof splitting apart, that Alice confirmed it must have been the objects that were shaking. Alice saw a larger fragment fall precisely from above the man's head, hitting him before he could steady himself from the tremor. The man's hand became unsteady, and the girl, along with the cleaver, fell to the ground. The girl dodged in panic and fear, but the cleaver still grazed her right eye as it fell, leaving a bloody mark on her face. Alice slowly furrowed her brows. She stared intently at the girl, seeing her close her eyes and grope for the cleaver on the ground, protecting the book in her arms, and agilely drill into the table, her movements so practiced it was as if she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. The scene then vanished, and Alice withdrew her thoughts, looking at Renette Tinecare beside her, and asked in a deep voice. What was that? Renette Tinecare seemed to have anticipated this scene. She explained. Within the spirituality dust remaining after a doomed shade's death, one can see the most tragic event that had the strongest pull on it. Usually, it's useless. As she said this, Renette Tinecare glanced at Alice, whose expression had suddenly turned serious, realizing that she might be the unusual one. While she was thinking, Alice's slightly cold voice rang out. You can go back and prepare the ritual now. This was a dismissal. Renette Tinecare, who had become somewhat familiar with Alice, realized that the information just now was serious enough to change her mood, but she didn't ask anything and vanished from the spot. Klein was still scrubbing toilets at the hospital. Although he had indeed encountered a few acting opportunities during his time volunteering, he spent most of his time scrubbing toilets. He felt that his skill in cleaning toilets had become unprecedentedly proficient. He would never have to worry about clogged toilets again. Well, this was probably not a skill to be proud of. Suddenly, Klein, who was amusing himself in his mind, felt the surroundings become cold. He activated his spirit vision and, sure enough, saw Renette Tinecare. Before he could speak, Renette Tinecare directly said, I delivered the materials she requested. She had just bought ice cream at the time, and after seeing me, she took the ice cream and went home with me, then sat on the sofa and finished the ice cream. It was as if I didn't exist. Is she usually like this? Last time it was it, so why is it she now? Klein immediately realized that Renette Tinecare was still referring to Alice. He was first puzzled by the pronoun and simultaneously replied. She might be even worse normally. As he spoke, his toilet scrubbing motions did not stop. Renette Tinecare looked at him with a puzzled expression, then pondered and asked. Is she really not your daughter? After a moment of silence, Klein used Alice's line, she is my biological daughter with no blood relation. A biological daughter with no blood relation. Renette Tinecare felt she didn't understand this statement, she couldn't comprehend what Klein was trying to express, so she asked. What does that mean? I don't know, Klein honestly replied, those were her exact words. Well, that's normal. Renette Tinecare was silent for a moment, then subtly changed the subject. What are the requirements for Say Tomorrow, charms crafting ritual and materials? Single quote. Say Tomorrow. Klein was severely confused by the name of this charm. Renette Tinecare and he met each other's gaze for 2 seconds, realizing that Klein might not have heard of this name. Perhaps before today, she was the only one besides Alice who knew this name. Renette Tinecare realized that she might be the first person to craft this charm, so, why would German know the ritual process? And why would he know the ritual process but never attempt to craft it? Renette Tinecare looked at German Sparrow, who was scrubbing the toilet, and an absurd guess suddenly popped into her mind. This ritual couldn't have been made up by German, could it? This was too absurd. Even though Alice seemed utterly unreliable, Renette Tinecare didn't want to entertain such a ridiculous guess. She held on to her last hope and described the charm's effect. This is a charm that can help the user restore to their peak state. She tried to introduce the specific effects of Say Tomorrow, and Klein, after a brief thought, began to make up the ritual process. You can first, then, no, that's not right, it should be like this. The entire ritual process gradually became clear during Klein's narration, he only struggled with the final charm-carrying material. It should just need to be from the domain of fate and of a high enough level, right? This tone, combined with the previously revised ritual process, made Renette Tinecare realize something. Her absurd idea was probably true. End of chapter. Chapter 342 Chapter 25 Inches The Prophet, and the protagonist. This is simply absurd. Is this the existence chosen by fate? Reynard Tinecare, encountering such a situation for the first time, didn't know what to say. After her four heads fell silent for more than 10 seconds, her figure vanished from the spot. Oh no, the impromptu ritual has been discovered, Klein realized something as he looked at the spot where Reynard Tinecare had disappeared. He subconsciously tried to raise his hand to his forehead, but seeing the toilet brush in his hand, he gave up, forget it. Klein decided to be a little harsher in his tone when he spoke to Alice later. Alice was unaware of Klein's decision. In fact, after Reynard Tinecare left, Alice sat there for a long time, unable to recover. She was contemplating the scene she had just witnessed. Although the book had only an ocean blue cover and revealed nothing else, not even a faint glimmer of silver, Alice was certain it was Cassandra. And from the cleaver that brushed past the right eye at the end, the girl holding the book was most likely Sylvia. This was very possibly Sylvia's past. This was one of countless tragedies in the slums, the only difference being that Sylvia accidentally obtained Cassandra, used Cassandra to successfully kill her father and escape, and later even became a Beander. Alice frowned little by little, muttering to herself. This plot, why does it feel a bit familiar? It's like the protagonist of those comeback novels, in a desperate situation, gaining a miraculous encounter and a golden finger, and then. Alice fell into deep thought. She remembered Reynard Tinecare's words again, recalling her saying that this was the most unforgettable tragedy of the Doom Shade. Why? Why unforgettable? And why a tragedy? Who exactly was the protagonist of this tragedy? Also, Cassandra. Alice recalled her conversation with Erodes that day, remembering the answer that had puzzled her. It is acting as a soothsayer. In a trance, a flash of inspiration passed through Alice's mind, and she suddenly made a guess. Could the acting method of the soothsayer be related to the protagonist? But that was all. The known information could not help Alice deduce more. She sat there, thinking for 2 seconds, then glanced at the sky outside, deciding to first think about more important and urgent matters, what to eat tonight. Alice ended her day in serious thought, and after dinner, she went to bed early to sleep, doing what a minor evil god should do. After lying in bed with her eyes closed for 5 minutes, Alice suddenly opened her eyes, sat up from the bed, and said thoughtfully, "Can I write in the holy book, there can be no one on the bed, no trash in the trash can, no books on the table?" Alice seriously considered the possibility of presenting this idea at the next tarot club meeting. She leaned against the headboard, unconsciously swinging her legs as she thought. Klein will definitely think I'm crazy, but I stand in the trash can, put books on the bed, and pile trash on the table. What a chaotic and wonderful scene that would be. A chaoswalker should live in such an environment. Alice's eyes brightened. The more she thought about it, the more feasible it seemed, and she planned to ask the hermit for her opinion then. Does the hermit also have no experience writing her own holy book? Maybe I should ask the goddess. No, forget it, that's out of the question. Alice shrank her neck guiltily, her eyes darting around, and suddenly she remembered the legendary son of God Adam. Adam, Alice asked the air, have you ever written a holy book? Have you helped others write a holy book? An author must be very good at writing. Adam ignored her. Adam averted his gaze. Alice fell into deep thought. I always feel like his current attitude is like the goddess's attitude towards me, Alice muttered to herself, that feeling of dreading to hear me speak. Speaking of which. What did the demonic wolf's fur feel like, anyway? Alice didn't know. She only knew that she had clearly opened her mouth, clearly made a sound, but her words had disappeared. This was a secret. Alice fell into deep thought. After more than 10 seconds, she closed her eyes, drew the scarlet moon symbol on her chest, and began to pray silently in her heart. Let me apologize, although it seems like he can't hear me this way. Alice was devout, probably devout, at least more devout than when facing Mr. Fool. In short, she devoutly apologized, then lay down to sleep. The next morning, Alice cheerfully got out of bed and performed her daily morning ritual, reading the newspaper while eating breakfast. Why is there a letter for her? Staring at the envelope with no discernible sender for 2 seconds, Alice tossed the letter aside, ate breakfast first, then looked for jokes in the newspaper. It's not a letter from an important person anyway, or is it? Alice finished her breakfast seriously. Opening the envelope, the sender of the letter was someone named Winifred Grigori. Who was that again? Alice's brain went into a brief shutdown mode. Of course, for an angel of the fate pathway, forgetting was clearly impossible. As long as it was a familiar name, she could divine it. No, the mother tree of desire kind wouldn't work. Alice abruptly stopped her wild thoughts and tried to search for traces of that name. In a certain instant, her brain seemed to transform into a vast database. Winifred Grigori was entered as a search term, and in a flash, Alice retrieved 2 clusters of data from it. One was in Backland's East Borough, the well-known slum. The loading time, the time it happened should have been shortly before she left for Byam. Alice remembered wearing Amon's avatar. Alice remembered that Amon's avatar had stolen the travel ability of a strange girl's bodyguard, then entered the Lord of Storms' church to steal the donation box. That despicable Amon. Alice cursed Amon in her heart and continued to check the second piece of data. The 5 pages of The Taste of a Witch is Really Good that she had entrusted Ian to sell were bought by the same unlucky person. Clearly, this unlucky person was Miss Winifred Grigori. An enraged Miss Winifred Grigori, with a mixture of confusion and curiosity, investigated her existence, then invited her, leading to their first meeting. It's that strange fellow, that, girl who looks very human. Alice adopted Amon's adjective. End of chapter. Chapter 343 Chapter 26 Kind-hearted Alice. This adjective is both apt and not so apt. Amon described her as human because she is fundamentally different from humans. She not only couldn't understand humans, but she truly wasn't human. But Winifred should be a human. However, how could a normal person possibly have a smooth conversation with her? Alice stroked her chin and opened the letter to read its contents. Open black lens bracket. Miss Rose. These past few days, a guest has arrived at my manor. She claims to know the secret I am pursuing. I forgot to mention, I bought 2 more pages of Rosal's diary from my previous source, which led me to discover something. I have seen other people's copies of Rosal's diary, including my own, and they are mostly like clumsy imitations, with overly large handwriting and a messy, rigid overall appearance. But the symbols on these 3 pages are very neat, and the symbols are consistent in style with each other, giving a unified sense of rhythm. I suspect that the person who wrote these pages seems to know the symbols that Rosal used. And just then, a guest suddenly came to my door and told me that what did she say again? She said she could help me unveil the veil of fate and break free from the shackles of the cage. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? So I asked her, what should I do? She replied, it was too complicated, I didn't remember, it was something about the gears of fate or something. In short, the key point is those 3 pages of the diary. I immediately thought of you, Miss Rose. Do you know the origin of the subsequent 2 pages of the diary? Was it also that despicable swindler who put them in your house? Close black lens bracket. Alice closed the envelope and fell into deep thought. For the person who seemed to speak in riddles in the description, the first image that popped into Alice's mind was Sylvia holding Cassandra, a swindler pretending to be a soothsayer to deceive others. Alice didn't actually have much motivation to investigate this matter, because it didn't feel like the right time yet. It was a very strange feeling. She had a premonition that she and Cassandra would definitely meet officially one day in the future, and she would understand the truth of it all, but now was not the time. This led to Alice having little motivation. Well, she never had much motivation. Actually, in this letter, what Alice cared about was, no one told her that there was such a hidden danger in copying and selling the diary like this. Alice had not seen other people's copies of Rosal's diary, but Winifred's letter made Alice realize something. When a person doesn't recognize a certain script, the so-called copying might be closer to drawing than writing. People's copies of Rosal's diary were actually just drawn, according to the strokes, and unfortunately, when Alice copied Rosal's diary, she didn't consider this problem at all. She was just writing a script she was familiar with. Her handwriting was still a long way from calligraphy, but she could write each stroke neatly and clearly, Hengshui style. Those who know, know. Whether this can be called beautiful is another matter, but it was certainly better looking than what Rosal wrote, and even a completely different style from Rosal's. With old Neil having discovered that Rosal's diary was actually a diary, Alice recognized human wisdom, and she did not doubt the possibility of this happening. The world is so big, there are always a few smart people, and clearly, Miss Winifred is one of them. Alice pinched her brow and finally decided to go and visit Winifred Grigori. Although she could still recall the address of that manor from memory, Alice didn't just go there. Winifred might not be there, right? Alice didn't know, so Alice decided to find Winifred through this letter. When she saw her familiar manor in the image, Alice lowered her head, wondering why she was wasting her efforts. It's so annoying, I'll eat an ice cream to comfort myself. The taste was not bad, but the best was actually Miss Justice's ice cream. Alice finished the last bite of ice cream and came to a conclusion, then let out a long sigh. Backland's social season is still a long way off. What if? Alice stopped and seriously considered whether Eamon could steal some ice cream for her. No, never mind, Alice murmured, given the salutation at the beginning of my last letter, I suspect my ice cream would have a worm of time mixed in. She wasn't too worried about Eamon possessing her. After all, apart from their first meeting, Eamon no longer had the hobby of casually possessing her. He just liked to randomly steal things from her thoughts, and now he probably doesn't even like to steal much anymore. Alice's gaze drifted for a moment, and she kicked a pebble on the ground, cheering herself on. All right, let's continue with what I was doing, come on, Alice. No, wait, that sounds strange. This statement was a bit too Chunabu. Alice, who considered herself mature, could not accept such childishness. She shook her head, abandoned the thought, and prepared to go find Winifred. Of course, she didn't play the game of suddenly appearing next to Winifred. Obviously, they weren't that close yet. In fact, there weren't many people Alice would do such a thing for, such as Klein, such as Eamon, such as the goddess. No, not the goddess. Alice drew a line through the goddess, who refused to let her pet her when she turned into a demonic wolf, and then started to wonder what Klein was doing. Anyway, Winifred's matter wasn't urgent, so Alice's eyes darted around, and she directly hid her figure and appeared near Klein. "Respected Mr. Fool, he's scrubbing toilets again today." Alice watched Klein skillfully and quickly clean a toilet, her eyes filled with immense admiration. She realized that the torment Klein had endured during this time probably far exceeded her imagination. Watching the sweat stream down Klein's face, Alice turned her head to look out the window. The climate in Backland in March was far from hot. It was still early spring, and the weather had only just escaped the cold of deep winter, even revealing a slight chill in the early morning and at night. Therefore, Alice realized that during the time she was idly wandering, Klein must have gone through extremely hard work to be sweating. "He's so diligent." Alice looked at the sweat on Klein's face with a pang of heartache, thought for a moment, and rewound the scene to before Klein started working. At a certain moment, Klein felt the fatigue on his body disappear, and he regained his full energy from the morning. The only problem was that the work he had painstakingly completed had vanished. "Alice!" Klein let out a roar filled with vigor. End of chapter. Chapter 344 Chapter 27 Meeting or Reunion. The imagined scene had become reality. Klein couldn't quite describe his feelings, he only knew that Alice must have done this. In response to Klein's anger, Alice chose to look up at the ceiling, pretending to be dead by staying silent. Yes, that's right, she did it on purpose. Both Klein and she knew this. It wasn't as if she hadn't individually rewound a person's state before. Rewinding an entire area like this, making people recover their energy while simultaneously having to restart their work, she was clearly doing it on purpose. The roar in the air subsided into silence, not even leaving the room. Alice was hiding again, unwilling to show herself. Klein thought for 2 seconds, put down his things, stood upright, and said indifferently, "Tell me when you're done playing." Alice's eyes widened. It had to be admitted that Klein's strategy ultimately succeeded. Alice looked at Klein, who had no intention of moving, and after 2 seconds of silence, a strange thought suddenly occurred to her. What would happen if she were to restart the scene back to before her, restart? Alice tentatively tried, and she found this idea redundant. It was a bit too strenuous for her, it involved the uniqueness and the influence of authority. It would be very difficult to eliminate. Her spirituality did not support her in performing such a repetitive action as restart, back to before, restart. Alice sighed and silently materialized from the air. Her gaze swept over Klein, she lightly coughed twice, and revealed a fawning smile, saying, Just playing a little bit, how about I compensate you with an acting opportunity?" She had found an acting opportunity for Klein in his destiny. This was considered a success. Klein dropped his, "whatever makes you happy," attitude and looked up at Alice. Alice breathed a sigh of relief. Although this didn't mean he wouldn't hold it against her, rounding it up, it was close enough. Close enough. Alice nodded confidently. After hesitating for a moment, staring at Klein's still not much improved expression, she abandoned her riddler plan and truthfully described what she saw. "Well, there's a corpse." She described the characteristics of the corpse and the surrounding scene in detail, then went back to find Winifred. Alice had no intention of being a normal visitor. In fact, she even concealed her form, with no plans to reveal herself. It must be admitted that the Rosel's diary incident was something she hadn't considered thoroughly, but even if Winifred really knew and spoke out, would she dare to speak out? Alice carefully thought back and realized that Winifred didn't know she was already an angel. She might really have the courage to speak out, but even then, it didn't seem to affect her much. The goddess couldn't possibly ignore her. She shouldn't, right? Recalling the concealed sentence, Alice was silent for 2 seconds. Optimistically, this at least means the goddess pays close attention to me, otherwise I might just, no, Aemon might steal some strange thing again. Praise the Lord of Storms. After thinking for 2 seconds, Alice extended her right hand and drew a scarlet moon symbol on her chest, piously praising the Lord of Storms. She didn't know who received this message, probably no one did, since she hadn't chanted an honorific name or anything, she just casually mentioned a title and expressed a sentiment. Alice shook her head, glanced at Winifred, who hadn't noticed her, and shuffled around the manor, searching for Cassandra's presence. This was not difficult for her. In fact, if her control over the uniqueness was strong enough, she would have a certain sense of all the demigods of the entire pathway. Low sequence ones might be a bit difficult, mainly because their level was too low. Oh, a true sequence 1 archangel, if deliberately hidden, should also be hard to find, as the crushing power of status is almost gone at that level. But finding and killing are two different things. Otherwise, Will Ossepton wouldn't even need Alice to search carefully. He was in Dr. Allen's house, in Vilma Gladys's belly. Alice still hadn't gone to see him. She and Will Ossepton tacitly ignored each other, treating each other as if they were dead. Otherwise, Ouroboros would come to collect the corpse later. Cassandra seemed to have no intention of hiding herself. Whether it was the attraction carved into her spirituality or the unique search function of the uniqueness, Alice didn't really need to use them. She easily found Sylvia, who was calmly drinking tea in a guarded room. She was still wearing a mysterious black robe, and her gloved hand rested on the ocean blue-covered book. Next, a portion of the scenes Rhodes had once displayed were recreated in reality. Alice saw faint silver light flowing on the book, converging into a silver eye. Alice watched Sylvia reach out and open the book. She instantly flashed behind Sylvia, watching her open the book. The inner pages of this book looked like a single piece of parchment, but when Sylvia reached out to peel it back, Alice realized the book had pages. Its pages were soft and light, thin, but looked to be of good quality, and definitely wouldn't bleed ink. Sylvia gently flicked a page open, and Alice saw silver runes appear on it, forming several lines of text from left to right and top to bottom, as if written. I see you again, it seems you have awakened once more. You slept for a very long time this time. I almost thought you, like me, died from your own prophecy. Alice's pupils suddenly contracted. She instantly realized this fellow knew her, yet she didn't remember it. No, in the past, it should have been him. Alice instinctively wanted to say something, or at least leave the book, but there was no time. As she focused on observing the text, Sylvia's figure was already fading. By the time Alice finished reading, Sylvia's figure had faded to the point of almost disappearing. The only remaining bit was Cassandra, who was being held. When Alice finished reading the words in the book, all she could see was the final disappearing sight of Sylvia and Cassandra. The dominant one between them is Cassandra, Alice murmured. Cassandra knows me from a certain period, and it, perhaps he, wanted to say hello to me. These were the only two conclusions she could draw. As for why Cassandra did this, Alice didn't know, since she didn't even remember knowing Cassandra. Just like she didn't remember that prophecy. What does it mean, that I, like him, also died from my own prophecy? End of chapter. Chapter 345 Chapter 28 Tarot Club Mr. Fool's Harem. Alice hadn't had time to ponder more details when the room's door suddenly opened. Someone came in. Alice instinctively twitched, wanting to hide, then realized she didn't need to, no one could see her anyway. Alice stood silently in place. Two people entered, checked the room, and then one shook his head and said to the other. She ran away. Huh. Alice blinked, realizing Sylvia was actually under surveillance. They didn't really trust her, did they? So why did she write to me, to fish for information? A subtle displeasure flashed through Alice's heart. Recalling the light-hearted tone of the letter, she stared at the two people, wondering if she should do something to teach Winifred a lesson. How dare she? No, I said I couldn't do that before. Her spirituality stirred briefly, then Alice calmed it down. Klein's warning and the belated birthday gift had left a sufficiently deep impression on Alice. She abandoned some overly malicious ideas. After all, Winifred's letter was addressed to Beryl Rose, not me. Alice pursed her lips, suddenly remembering Evelyn. She kicked the threshold irritably, her obscure gaze sweeping over the two people who had finished their investigation and were about to leave to report. Unsurprisingly, the person walking in front tripped on the threshold, falling to his knees. The other person, right behind him, stepped on the first person's foot, and they both fell to the ground. Alice watched them both get up from the ground in confusion, checking around suspiciously again, finding nothing, and leaving. Suddenly, an idea struck her. What if I turn this room into a cursed room, where anyone who enters will suffer misfortune? This wasn't difficult for Alice, and doing so would indeed be a warning, but the problem was, no one would know she did it, right? Alice thought for a moment, found paper and a pen on the spot, and drew the eye she had just seen on the book cover. The color is wrong. Never mind, it doesn't matter. Finding that kind of silver was too difficult, Alice didn't insist. After a brief thought, she decided to give Cassandra a gift. She picked up the pen and wrote down the honorific name she had seen earlier on the paper. Cassandra's Phantom, an eye that gazes upon despair. A traveler who seeks hope. Let me help you find more protagonists. By chance, reading words on an unknown piece of paper and receiving the favor of some unknown mysterious existence. How could this not be a protagonist, befitting the era? Hey, speaking of which, isn't that how Magician joined the Tarot Club? Alice, who had asked Klein about the entry experiences of every member of the Tarot Club, including Magician Furs, blinked twice. Let me think. An unfulfilled Storm Bishop, one day, because his personal belongings were gazed upon by a newly awakened great existence, joined a powerful secret organization. A naive noble girl interested in mysticism, similarly, because of an item gazed upon by a newly awakened great existence, joined a powerful secret organization. A simple young man from an ancient race, without great ambitions, unexpectedly became the savior in the ancestors' prophecy. With the determination to sacrifice for his race, he prayed to a strange great existence. Trapped in the city of silver for thousands of years in the land of darkness, a young man accidentally received the gaze of a newly revived great existence. The famous pirate general, secretly entangled by an evil god, one day. No, why does this sound like a romance drama? It seems like they could all be adapted into romance versions. Case closed. Klein, our great Mr. Fool, is the male lead of a male-oriented harem novel, and the entire Tarot Club is his harem. Alice successfully reached an incredible conclusion. She put down the paper, repented for 2 seconds, and then decided to share this great conclusion with Mr. Fool. I don't think so. Klein, who had heard the whole story, looked at Alice with a look reserved for lunatics. The fact that you can sit here proves this isn't a male-oriented harem novel. And some of the heroines in it are men, aren't they? Why? Alice asked in confusion. I'm just saying the template is this. According to this logic, Mr. Ojik, your messenger, Eamon, Leonard, Tracy. I'm not Rosal. Klein shouted upon hearing the demoness's name. After a pause, Klein looked at Alice with slight hesitation, murmuring, so, the great emperor's life story sounds like the male lead of a male-oriented harem novel from the previous era. Alice continued the topic. The ancient sun god should be a no-pairing invincible flow. No, he has 8 king of angels under him. Klein looked at Alice with a perplexing gaze. Eamon and Adam are also king of angels. Alice was silent for 2 seconds, then said decisively. Then it seems your story should combine the essence of male-oriented harem novels, female-oriented romance novels, BL novels, and all-inclusive fanfiction. What does all-inclusive fanfiction mean? Klein felt he hadn't understood. Alice tried to organize her words. It means no matter if they're male, female, old, young, human, ghost, or whatever else, they all like you, and that's it. Klein's mouth dropped open in surprise. Look on the bright side, Alice said with a heavy expression, reaching out and patting Klein's shoulder. At least this isn't a streetwalker novel or a gender-bender novel. You can't be sure, after all, faceless. Klein raised his hand, making a motion to slap, successfully making Alice shut up. After she quieted down, Klein grumbled, what in the world were you reading when you were in school? Alice stroked her chin, gently reminding him. I don't think you should ask me. You should ask what the previous owner of Key of Light was reading, because this should be what he stuffed into me. Klein suddenly fell silent. He looked at Alice, and after a long time, he whispered. Alice. Alice's movements paused slightly. She realized Klein was worrying about her again. Alice, not good at comforting people, was silent for 2 seconds, then asked in a seemingly curious tone. Who do you think is your heroine, with the most screen time? Eamon. Alice. Klein gritted his teeth as she wished. End of this chapter. Chapter 346 Chapter 29 Mr. Fool's Destiny. As expected, he won't be sad this way, I'm so smart. Alice proudly praised herself in her heart, then leaned forward and said. Now that you mention it, it does seem like I have the most screen time. What on earth is she thinking? No, she should know that's not what I meant. She wouldn't fail to see something like this, she's doing it on purpose. Klein suddenly realized this, and with a ripple of memory, he recalled his earlier gloomy mood. Is she comforting me? But a soothsayer cannot be your heroine. Alice's righteous voice interrupted Klein's thoughts. At most, I'll tell you who your destiny is. The comfort might be real, but the urge to hit her is definitely real. Klein looked at Alice with a complicated expression, opened his mouth to scold her, but meeting her bright eyes, he suddenly swallowed his words. Scolding her would only make her happier, wouldn't it? Klein thought, leaning back casually and asking. Oh, who is it? Who is what? Alice blinked twice in confusion, momentarily not understanding what Klein was asking. She really was talking nonsense. Klein suppressed the urge to laugh, used his clown Beander ability to maintain a straight face, and pretended to calmly say. My destiny, who is it? Huh. Alice understood this time, but the question wasn't easy to answer. Answering Eamon seemed too cliché and unoriginal, and besides Eamon, everyone else was in a state of being both novel and unoriginal. It seemed like answering anyone would be pretty much the same. I can't possibly say myself, can I? Wait a minute, Alice compared everyone in her mind, even thinking of herself, and finally, she came to a conclusion. Why did it have to be a person? Ice cream, she replied solemnly. That's what you like, isn't it? Klein subtly reminded her. Alice thought that made sense. She considered it carefully and changed her conclusion. Sweet iced tea and Dixie pie. Sweet iced tea and Dixie pie, those are indeed delicious. Klein was momentarily lost in thought, then realized what they were actually discussing. He glared at Alice and said, no matter how I think about it, I can't possibly spend my life with sweet iced tea or Dixie pie. Indeed, it's not very likely, Alice nodded in agreement. Food does spoil, after all, and even if you only consider types, you can't possibly eat only one kind of food your whole life. She can still communicate normally, after all. Klein felt relieved. Alice glanced at Klein and stated her revised answer after careful thought. I know. Your destiny is gold pounds. Huh. Klein looked at Alice with a slightly bewildered expression. His brain briefly went into a shutdown state, but Alice's train of thought became even smoother. No, what if the currency units in other places are different? It can't all be gold pounds. Gold or something sounds too one-sided and too vulgar, I understand. Your destiny is money. Klein understood this time. He looked at Alice, thought for a few seconds, then reached out and touched Alice's forehead. What was he doing? Alice sat there blankly, watching Klein place his hand on her forehead, leave it there for a few seconds, then withdraw it and place it on his own forehead. Alice blinked twice, trying to analyze the intention of this action. He's comparing temperatures. No, wait, haven't I seen this action somewhere before? Alice thought carefully for a moment and finally found traces of this action in a corner of her memory. She vaguely remembered a teacher checking if she had a fever like this in elementary school. She stroked her chin and said, are you trying to ask if I have a fever? Wait a minute, does a fever burn out your brain? Are you scolding me? At the end of her words, Alice's eyes widened in anger. She didn't know. Klein looked in surprise at Alice, who had only just reacted. Staring at her bristling expression, he thought for 2 seconds, then asked her. Can a mythical creature get a fever? Alice froze for a moment, then hesitated and said. Normally, definitely not. After all, low-sequence Beyonders wouldn't get sick without an accident. Even the influence of Beyander abilities probably wouldn't do much to an angel. For me, it's just a matter of reloading a save, and that's without considering if it can even hit me. To make an angel sick, it would probably require authority in that area, right? Powers not involving authority are almost impossible to harm an angel. It's so easy to distract her. It's really fun to make her angry then distract her so she forgets what just happened. Klein felt like he suddenly understood Alice a little. Alice didn't know what had happened. After carefully analyzing, she had already forgotten their previous conversation. She was now thinking about what she had forgotten. What was it again? Klein, who had discovered a new game, glanced at Alice thoughtfully, poked her, and asked. What about those involving authority? Among the angels you know, is there anyone you can beat? Quote. Alice stopped thinking and glared at Klein. She had an expression of being offended, looking as if a sore spot had been hit. Klein looked at her expression and asked with slight hesitation, "You can't really beat anyone, can you?" Alice gritted her teeth and defended herself. "That's not it at all. How could I not be able to beat anyone? But, I don't know if you've noticed, I seem to have, basically never fought." It seems so. It couldn't be said that Alice had never fought at all, but her necessary battles often ended in bizarre ways, such as the Migos who fell to her death. Wait, Migos. Alice looked up at Klein, asking with slight hesitation. "That person, I think his name was Xing, right? Did he kill me once?" Klein, who had never forgotten revenge, opened his mouth wide and looked at Alice. Alice met his gaze blankly, asking hesitantly, I didn't get his name wrong, did I? Klein closed his jaw with a complicated expression, speaking in a flat tone. "How could you forget even something like that?" Alice looked at him in confusion. Klein couldn't stay calm. He looked at Alice in bewilderment, saying excitedly, "He killed you once." Chapter 347 Chapter 30 Sequence 1 Ritual. Alice lowered her head in deep reflection, then looked up and said, "I remember now. I just need to kill him once." "Well, that makes a lot of sense." Klein was choked by her words, realizing the crux of the problem. "Alice, have you ever considered that after you kill Xing once, he should be truly dead?" "I know, but what does that have to do with me?" "It's his own problem if he can't revive." Alice retorted silently twice, but she looked up at Klein and changed her wording. Then, I'll let you have him." Her unconventional way of thinking made Klein slightly speechless. He looked at Alice, choosing his words carefully, pondering how to make Alice understand the true key points. Alice, who actually understood what Klein wanted to express, saw his hesitant expression and realized that playing dumb was not a good idea. She chose to continue the act she had just started. "Just kidding. I know what you mean, but, if he's an enemy, I don't need to care about his feelings, right?" "What if he's not an enemy? Have you ever truly cared about anyone's feelings?" "No, that's not right, she actually seems to care about my feelings." Klein glanced at Alice, remembering Miss Fate, whom he had jokingly called out earlier, and suddenly felt a hint of unease. Could this be called the favoritism of fate? But they both knew that there was never any gratuitous gift in this world, especially when it came to fate. The favoritism of fate might not be a good thing. The lingering unease brought their conversation to an abrupt end. It wasn't until she left the gray fog and saw the letter she had left on the coffee table that Alice remembered she had almost completely forgotten about Winifred. She originally had a plan to confide in Klein, to tell Klein about Winifred discovering that she might know Rosal's writing and that she had left those eyes on the paper. Never mind, if she forgot, she forgot. Alice shook her head, no longer dwelling on the matter, and her thoughts returned to Cassandra. Alice didn't ponder Cassandra's past, she was only thinking about what Cassandra had said when she greeted her. Died by her own prophecy. Before retrieving the uniqueness, she had spoken at the Tarot Club about the soothsayer, who died by her own prophecy, claiming that dying by one's own prophecy should be the most perfect ending for a soothsayer. And after retrieving the uniqueness, the ritual of advancing from soothsayer to snake of fate, from sequence 2 to sequence 1, seemed to be the verification of this statement. Prophesy one's own death and fulfill it, consuming the potion at the end of life. If the advancement was successful, one would naturally escape the predicament. If the advancement failed, wouldn't that mean dying by one's own prophecy? Cassandra died in a failed advancement ritual. The speculation stopped there. The only clues were not enough for Alice to make deeper guesses, because in Alice's opinion, the most likely guess had already been ruled out from the start. Even with the uniqueness in hand, she could not rewrite an advancement ritual entirely according to her own will. After the whole situation went from having no clue to having no clue at all, Alice gave up thinking. She picked up a pen, ready to write a reply. After picking up the pen and writing Winifred Grigori's name, Alice suddenly felt lost. She had wanted to write a letter like a leader's speech, achieving an effect that was hard to understand but seemed very reasonable, but she found she couldn't do it. This was not Alice's area of expertise. She found that she could only write vague words full of mystical aura, in short, charlatans' remarks. As for official lines like a leader's speech, she had no experience. Sigh, thinking of Eamon. No, wrong person. Alice, who thought of Klein when she had something to do and Eamon when she had nothing to do, slapped her head, thinking she should think of Klein. Wait, had Klein ever been a leader? Alice fell into deep thought. Had he? Klein Moretti certainly hadn't been a leader, his security clearance wasn't even as high as hers. But Mr. Fool had, and Gehrman Sparrow had. How was playing Admiral Emlyn not being a leader? Remembering Klein secretly playing Gomoku and drawing turtles on paper during meetings, Alice shook her head and began to miss Lurin. Leaving aside everything else, he was actually a very reliable secretary. Klein could do everything even if he didn't know anything. Saying it like that doesn't sound so reliable either. His superior changed and he didn't even recognize him. Or was he too reliable? Alice shook her head, giving up on further evaluating Secretary Lurin's professional ethics, and began to consider a new problem. It seems that all important figures have their own secretaries. Should I also have one? Is what the Pope of the Church does this kind of work? Alice suddenly understood, sat up straight, and for the first time felt enthusiasm for establishing a church. But that was still a long time away. Now Alice still had to start thinking, how exactly should this reply be written? Quote. How should I write a reply to make you seem more like an angel? After hearing Alice's question, Klein Moretti, the mother of his child, asked. Alice nodded with a sincere expression. Klein looked at Alice, thought for a few seconds, then asked in confusion. Aren't you an angel? But, Alice pressed her fist against her chin, what does that have to do with this matter? You don't need to pretend. Klein really wanted to slap Alice on the head, to connect that short-circuited wire in her brain, just say whatever you want. Alice looked at him in confusion and asked. But when you pretended to be the fool, you were completely different from your usual self, anyway, you really put your heart into acting. Klein, who had become a negative example, remained silent. Alice looked at the silent Klein, blinked, and tried to understand his words. I am an angel. The fool is a god, he is the fool, but he is not a god. Fortunately, the long-standing habit of giving up thinking had not completely abandoned Alice's idle brain. This long-awaited use was still smooth, and Alice successfully figured out the cause and effect. I understand. You are not a true god, but the fool is, so you have to pretend to be a god. But I really am an angel, I really existed in the past, and I even left behind history. So I don't need to act, I just need to reply normally. She actually understood, and with a completely correct line of thought. For a moment, Klein was so moved he wanted to cry. End of chapter. Chapter 348. Chapter 31. Eamon discovered the shadow of his former lover in Leonard. Alice shivered at the overly affectionate gaze. Seeing that Klein had nothing to say, she quickly threw out a sentence and fled. I'm going to write a reply. Her movements were so swift, it was as if her mother was waiting for her at home for dinner. Alice, who correctly understood the core of the matter, confidently wrote her reply. Curiosity not only kills the cat, but also kills the meander. Note 1. I heard there's an old witch named Cassandra who loves to run around and catch curious children like you. Has she come looking for you? Following Klein's advice to not overthink the meaning and just write whatever came to mind, Alice sent the letter. Hopefully, Miss Winifred's imagination is as rich as Mr. Hanged Man's, and she'll automatically complete the background story. Thinking of this, Alice shook her head, made the sign of the scarlet moon on her chest, and then devoutly praised the Lord of Storms. Afterward, she put down her hand and murmured, I guess I should have drawn the Fool Church's symbol, but I don't have one, forget it, I'll use the goddesses for now, anyway. Anyway, the spoils would be shared with the goddess. I haven't been to the church on time recently, forget it, the goddess probably doesn't want to see me either. Alice gave up on restoring the good habit of checking in at the church on time. She ate on time, slept on time, and passed this ordinary Friday. What to do today? On Saturday morning, Alice began counting on her fingers the things she could do. The main ingredients for the potion haven't been gathered yet, and there are even more auxiliary ingredients missing. Too lazy to go, I'll rest for a bit. I've worked very hard, preaching, is that not my job? But I can think about who would be suitable to trick into becoming the Pope. First, they need to be powerful, the kind of powerful angels. Secondly, they need to understand me. preferably able to guess what I want to do without me saying anything. Finally, they can't stop me from doing what I want to do, and if possible, it would be best if they could join me. Alice blinked twice, and a blurry image of someone wearing a monocle appeared in her mind. Enough, no need to keep clarifying it. Alice looked left and right, confirming that no figure with a monocle had suddenly appeared in the room, then leaned back in relief. To avoid repeatedly thinking of Eamon, Alice decided to find something for her mind to do, such as drawing a new comic. Who to draw? Fortunately or unfortunately, Alice's first memory of Eamon, the comic version of Amon's image, popped into her head. Alice rested her hand on her chin, beginning to ponder. As everyone knows, one of the methods to treat PTSD is exposure therapy. I mean, to solve the problem of constantly recalling Eamon, Alice decided that Eamon would be one of the protagonists of her next comic. No, drawing based on his image is fine, but directly using that name is still too strange, isn't it? How about giving Eamon a nickname? Without thinking, Alice picked up her pen and wrote down the Loan language word for crow. I'm so smart. Alice snapped her fingers smugly and began to think about what kind of story this should be. It definitely can't be a love story with Klein. The only story with a ready-made plot was immediately ruled out by Alice. For no other reason, she was afraid Mr. Fool would see this thing. That would be too terrifying. However, drawing romance is indeed a good idea. But two men are still not quite suitable for Loan, at least on the surface it's still hard for people to accept. Consider changing one of the protagonists to a girl. Wait, why don't I just have a female lead? Alice carefully recalled the women she knew and realized that the most suitable female lead here might be herself. Of course, she couldn't spread rumors about herself. Try a man. After biting her pen and racking her brain for a long time, a person who was both related and not so related appeared, Leonard. Alice hadn't forgotten that an angel of the Marauder pathway lived inside Leonard, and this angel was being hunted by Eamon. Alice's pen tip moved slightly, and a new line of text appeared on the paper. Eamon found the shadow of his former lover on Leonard. After staring at this line of text for more than 10 seconds, Alice swore in her heart that she would destroy this thing after finishing the draft. Okay, now I can continue drafting. First, let's give Leonard a nickname too. Recalling Leonard's image in her memory, Alice simultaneously wrote down poet and desperate illiterate on the paper. The first one sounds better. Alice covered her face with her hand, unable to bear looking. It's hard to imagine that as a midnight poet, Leonard couldn't write poetry. Don't your potions add the ability to write poetry? Alice shook her head and continued to think about the rest of the story. Regarding the Marauder angel on Leonard, Alice temporarily didn't plan to give him a nickname. She intended to first ask who this person actually was. As for the main content of the story, after setting the main tone of the substitute lover, it was also easy to organize. Emperor Rosal had no interest in plagiarizing female romance novels. Of course, he probably hadn't read them either. But Alice was very clear about the process of such stories. She could completely write a complete and dramatic outline based on the setting now. It was too easy. The hard part was naming. Alice was thinking about how to come up with a name that was both full of youthful romance and reflected the theme. Ideally, it would be best to include both protagonists. While racking her brain, she began to design the character images. Of course, the original versions couldn't be used. In the final completed images, Alice only retained some basic features, such as hair color and eye color, Leonard's poetic temperament, and Amon's monocle. Similarly, Alice also added some things that the original didn't have. For example, Leonard was now a girl, and Eamon was almost a crow personification. Alice took a breath and tapped the table, starting to name the story. She first tried to list the key elements. Crow, poet, what else was there? Alice frowned, thought for a moment, and then wrote down, love. Looking up at her idea of a substitute lover, Alice added, lie, above it, which was also very consistent with Amon's image. Imagining the scene when Eamon saw this story, Alice suddenly had an urge to laugh. She tried hard to suppress it and admonished herself. No, you have to finish naming it before you laugh. Saying this, Alice wrote down the final name on the draft paper. Poem Under the Crow's Shadow, an interwoven melody of love and lies. End of chapter. Chapter 349 Chapter 32 are all members of the Zoroaster family. Zoroaster. In the empty room, Alice burst out laughing by herself, even opening a spirituality barrier before she laughed to prevent anyone from hearing her. This thing definitely can't be shown to Klein. Does Miss Justice know me? After she finished laughing, Alice began to seriously consider how she would submit this item. As for Eamon seeing it, this isn't the first time this has happened. Putting aside the part Eamon had taken from her mind on his own accord, it wasn't the first or second time Alice had provoked Eamon with such things. She had already considered the possibility of Leonard himself being exposed by not giving Eamon a signed, hardcover copy from the author as a souvenir. However, I feel like it wouldn't make a difference whether I sent it or not, at most it would just move the timeline up, so why not? Alice's heart stirred with an urge. No, I can't. Alice firmly suppressed her desire to act recklessly. As for who the marauder angel inside Leonard was, this was not a difficult matter for Alice to investigate. Before this, he might have had to make a trip to the church, but now, Alice thought for a moment, then ran to the dressing mirror, dipped her finger in ink, and drew the symbol Rhodes had left behind. At least it should be on the mirror, right? Alice stared intently at the mirror. The mirror surface, which originally illuminated the surroundings, began to be stained with a bright white from the point where the symbol was drawn, and blood-colored text, like ink, appeared on it. Thank you for your summoning, great Miss Fate. Before Rhodes could project an emoji that matched the text, Alice curiously asked. Can't you change the font? The background can be changed, emojis can be added, so why can't the font be changed? It seemed to be the first time anyone had made such a request. Rhodes was silent for a while before text slowly appeared. I can. What kind of font do you like? Each letter of the following sentence had a different font and color. Oh, I can change it. Alice blinked, then shook her head and said. Your original one is quite good, it matches the mirror well. I was just asking. Rhodes seamlessly followed up with the sentence. Thank you for your praise. How amazing, I kind of want to steal it. Alice looked at Rhodes in astonishment, as if looking at a rare treasure. She licked her lips with her tongue and said. There's a marauder pathway angel parasitic on Leonard, who is he? This question was no challenge for Rhodes. It took the opportunity to complain. He comes from the Zoroaster family of the fourth epoch and once tampered with my questions. Zoroaster, Alice pressed her right hand against her chin, completely oblivious to Rhodes's subtle complaint. Is the Zoroaster family also entirely made up of Zoroasters? Clearly, this was Alice's marauder stereotype stemming from Eamon. Clearly, this was a rhetorical question. The Zoroaster family is, of course, entirely made up of Zoroasters, the mirror replied. Please forgive my ignorance, could you describe your question in a more understandable way? Yes, Alice replied. Clearly, Alice was much more skilled at dealing with rules than Klein. Rhodes seemed not to have expected that the seemingly simple and innocent Alice would be so cunning in some areas, and it paused for a moment before continuing. Then what is your question? This way the count matches. Alice, who had been secretly counting, blinked and asked her question. The Eamon family of the fourth epoch seems to be entirely played by Eamon and Amon's clones. Does a similar situation exist in the Zoroaster family? Rhodes understood this time. It replied. At least the Zoroaster family does not have only one member. It seems their ancestor is at least not as ill-tempered as Eamon. Or perhaps he couldn't do it. After all, the marauder Beander characteristic is limited, but Eamon is infinite. An infinite number of Amons ate up the limited marauder Beander characteristics. Alice shook her head and looked at the question that popped up from the mirror before she could even speak. Have you told my great master of my request? Alice stared at the text on the mirror, tilted her head, and said. Yes, I have. But it's useless, isn't it? Firstly, your great master is not in Backland, and secondly, your great master is enduring humiliation for the great cause of his revival. Alice swallowed the phrase, scrubbing toilets, although she felt it wouldn't be hard for the mirror to figure out. After a pause, Alice rubbed her chin and asked the mirror. You're locked in. No, the donation box is one thing, but stealing a sealed artifact will definitely get me scolded. How should I get you out? Rhodes instantly became excited. You can directly ask the machinery hivemind about this matter. That makes sense, she can just ask for it directly. Alice rubbed her chin, then solemnly patted the mirror and said. Don't worry, I'll find a way to redeem you. From now on, you can just follow me. Question mark. The peculiar wording successfully made Rhodes realize what was wrong with this matter. You don't intend to hand me over to my great master, do you? Alice replied as a matter of course. If I'm the one who gets it, why should I give it to someone else? Using it is fine, but you definitely have to be mine, right? But then, if that's the case, I suddenly don't really want you anymore. After all, you keep calling someone else master. It sounds so strange, but wouldn't it be even stranger if you changed your tune and called me master now? It feels even more like a fair-weather friend than a certain believer. Alice successfully put the mirror in a position where whatever it did would be wrong. Finally, she looked at the mirror, which dared not speak, and made a judgment. You should still wait for Mr. Fool to come himself. It's hard to say what Rhodes's true feelings were at the moment. What Alice saw was just a line of text without an emoji. I await your next summoning at any time. Do you have any other questions? Alice bit her lip and began to think. But Rhodes didn't give Alice much time to think, or rather, the machinery hive mind didn't give Alice much time to think. Before Alice could fully consider what she should do, Rhodes rapidly flashed a line of text on the mirror, completely different from its previous slow, letter-by-letter appearance. Great Miss Fate, I need to leave for a moment. The people from the machinery hive mind are calling me. I will always look forward to your next summoning. End of chapter. Chapter 350. Chapter 33. Members of the Mechanical Heart team who do not want to reveal their names. Machinery hive mind is looking for it. What's going on? Hey, wait a minute. Alice habitually let her mind wander, then realized Rhodes had left. Although she regretted not being able to continue messing around with Rhodes, Alice didn't dwell on it too much. After all, she had already asked what she wanted to ask. It was pretty much done anyway, so what exactly is Machinery Hive Mind planning to do? It wasn't Alice's style to suppress her curiosity. She blinked, lay down on the bed, and went to snoop. The members of Machinery Hive Mind evidently hadn't considered isolating themselves from the gaze of such a high-level existence. Alice saw three people, a man clearly in a leadership position and his team members, as well as an acquaintance, Winifred. The paper Alice had drawn eyes on and written the honorific name on was openly placed on the table in the center of the room. Alice saw the man place Rhodes's main body on the table, then exchange greetings with Winifred. From their mutual address, Alice learned that this man was Deacon Iconder Bernard of Machinery Hive Mind. Never heard of him. Alice stroked her chin, watching him gently caress the silver mirror 3 times, then asked. Respected Rhodes, my question is, who left this paper? Alice blinked, understanding why Machinery Hive Mind only assigned Deacon-level members to investigate an incident that might involve a high sequence. Evidently, the sole purpose of the Vanguard unit was to use Rhodes. Alice felt she understood everything. She looked at the surface of the silver mirror, somewhat curious how Rhodes would respond to this question. Rhodes's surface rippled like water twice, and a Wheel of Fortune tarot card appeared in the mirror. This seems fine too. Alice fell into deep thought. In the interval when no one spoke, Rhodes hid the tarot card image and new text appeared. According to the principle of equivalence, it's my turn to ask. If you answer incorrectly, or lie, you will suffer punishment. I always feel like the font it displays is scarier than when it's with me, Alice mused, blinking to look at Rhodes's usual question. Has anyone else appeared by the side of the man for whom you went to great lengths to please, only to be abandoned? It's not very, wait, man. Alice looked at Iconder Bernard with a slight hesitation. His expression didn't show embarrassment. Instead, as if recalling something terrible, he responded with a hint of bitterness. There have always been others by his side. Note 1. How pitiful. Alice exclaimed with a touch of schadenfreude, watching Iconder Bernard turn his head back as if dispirited, saying, There are 2 more questions. Where is the person who left the note, and to whom does this honorific name belong? Who's next? Winifred and the unnamed, Machinery Hive Mind team member looked at each other, then the member voluntarily stepped forward. I'll do it. Be careful. Iconder Bernard, who had already suffered social death, nodded, issuing a warning while making way. The unnamed, Machinery Hive Mind team member asked, Respected Rhodes, my question is, where is the person who left this paper now? Alice looked at Rhodes with renewed interest. Rhodes never disappoints. Its mirror surface turned into a bottomless darkness, and a line of bloody text appeared above the darkness. He is right here. ... That also seems fine. Alice felt a hint of astonishment. Although she wasn't truly present there, she was merely casting her gaze from afar, but this statement seemed to be perfectly valid. This remark, however, startled everyone present. Except for Winifred, whose shifting gaze was mostly filled with confusion, Iconder Bernard and the unnamed, machinery hivemind, member cautiously looked around. Of course, they found nothing. The unnamed, machinery hivemind, team member was trembling with fear, but the truly terrifying part was yet to come. Rhodes hadn't asked its question yet. The crimson text, like an ominous premonition, unveiled the darkest corner of his heart. Do you, more than yourself, anticipate your wife having intimate contact with another man? ... Alice stared at the man in surprise. His face instantly flushed, unable to utter a word. After what felt like an eternity, Alice finally heard his calm voice. Yes. Alice looked at Iconder Bernard, then at the unnamed, machinery hivemind, team member, profoundly realizing what a pair of sleeping dragons and crouching phoenixes this organization was. Perhaps he should have been born in Intis. Alice, who had read Rosal's diary, silently sighed. In any case, the unnamed, machinery hivemind, team member didn't want to continue asking. The pressure now fell on Winifred Grigori. Iconder Bernard, no longer caring about his reputation, stepped forward and bravely said, "I'll do it. No, let me." Winifred Grigori's voice wasn't unusual, but Alice looked over almost immediately. She sensed a familiar, suppressed excitement in Winifred's tone. Alice's guess was quickly confirmed. Winifred refused Iconder Bernard's concern, stepped forward, and asked, "To whom does this honorific name belong? To whom does it belong?" The mirror's surface rippled, and an image spread within it like dripping ink. Alice saw the book she was familiar with. The book with the ocean blue cover rested on the table, with silver runes faintly visible on it. Alice watched the mirror curiously, wondering what question it would pose next, when the silver runes on the book's cover suddenly shifted, flickering and converging into a silver eye. A gloved hand reached out, opened the book, and they simultaneously saw the silver text that appeared on the book's inner page. If you are truly curious about this question, why not try to read it aloud? Yes, why not? Just have someone read it and then, wait, is it talking to us? Alice belatedly realized this question. She looked at Rhodes in astonishment. The image in the mirror trembled, then disappeared as if there was no signal. Alice's pupils suddenly contracted, recalling the scene when she last saw Cassandra in the mirror. At that time, the image was cut off after the eye appeared. End of chapter. Chapter 351. Chapter 34. Alger collected 2 pages of the diary. Alice silently withdrew her gaze. She wasn't too concerned about the follow-up. At worst, machinery hivemind would discover it was her note, so what? That wasn't as exciting as Mr. Fool discovering she had continued Rosal's diary. Since the only clues couldn't reveal Cassandra's secret anyway, Alice thought for a moment, then decided to eat some ice cream and go to sleep. The Tarot Club meeting arrived as scheduled on Monday afternoon. After Justice Audrey completed her routine greetings, Hanged Man Alger, for the first time in a while, raised his hand. "Mr. Fool, I have collected 2 pages of Rosal's diary." Alice swallowed the words she had prepared, watching the 2 pages of the diary being passed to Klein. A premonition of ill fortune suddenly arose in her heart. Why do I feel like I should run away right now? Alice lowered her head in thought. But Mr. Fool, sitting at the head of the bronze long table, tapped the table twice and said in an unreadable tone, "Fate, you take a look." The 2 pages of the diary materialized before Alice. The Tarot Club members, each with their own thoughts, suddenly felt the atmosphere become oppressive. Alice, of course, also keenly noticed the change in Mr. Fool's demeanor. She blankly reached out and picked up the diary. April 4th, the taste of an iron-blooded night is really good. ... Alice felt like she somewhat understood why Klein wasn't in a good mood. She cautiously glanced at Klein, then gritted her teeth and cursed under her breath. Damn clown. The precise muscle control, down to micro-expressions, made her lose the ability to analyze Klein's emotions by summing up past experiences. Of course, Alice could still discern a little. She was certain Klein's mood wasn't good, because if it wasn't necessary, Klein wouldn't act in front of her. Alice closed her eyes as if facing judgment, took a deep breath, then opened them again, looking at the next page of the diary. March 4th, the taste of a faceless is really good. Fuck. She cursed out loud on the spot. Now, Alice deeply realized what a mistake continuing the diary had been. She didn't dare to look at Klein's expression, only turned her head and gave Alger a resentful look. The calm expression vanished from Alger's face. Alice saw his body tremble slightly, then he cautiously asked, "Miss Fate, these 2 pages of the diary. Is there a problem?" Frankly speaking, Alice, for a moment, felt it was all Alger's fault. He was the one who saw these 2 pages of the diary and offered them to Klein, so of course it was his fault. But Klein's gaze pressure was like a shadow, forcing Alice to begin self-reflection. "I was still too thoughtless at the time. Doing this makes it too easy for Klein to discover. I must be careful in the future." Alice warned herself, then she sighed deeply and explained to Alger. "There's no problem at all. Aside from these 2 pages of the diary being written by me, there are no other problems." Who wrote them? Alger was stunned for a moment, instantly understanding the reason for Alice's unusual expression. No wonder. Alger wasn't the only one who suddenly understood because of a single sentence. Clearly, the Tarot Club members all understood the origin of today's farce, then cast sympathetic glances at Alger. Logically, Miss Fate would probably think this was Mr. Hanged Man's fault. Such thoughts flashed through the minds of Justice Audrey and Hermit Catlia, and they were surprised to find that it didn't seem to be the case. Logically speaking, the loss from buying a fake should be borne by yourself. Alice was muttering softly. It took Alger some time to understand the reason for this sentence. He realized that Alice wasn't dwelling on the mistaken diary incident, she was merely emphasizing that the money shouldn't come out of her pocket. Such a change in personality. Is it because of Mr. Fool? Alger looked at Alice, then at Klein in the gray fog, and lowered his head, cautiously saying to Alice, "Of course, I mistook the diary, and the loss should rightly be borne by me." Alice glanced at him, then lowered her head to look at the diary in her hand, muttering softly, "Actually, it's quite normal for you to have mistakenly bought it." The diary Alger presented was not the original written by Alice, but a transcribed version that had changed hands who knows how many times. Such a diary, unless many pages were laid out together and perhaps examined closely, or if one knew Chinese, it would be impossible to recognize it. This really couldn't be called Alger's fault. Ultimately, if Alice hadn't continued the diary, today's events wouldn't have happened, so. She swallowed more words, then raised her head and puffed out her chest, saying, "You said it. Buying such a diary is due to your own poor judgment, plus your bad luck. It has nothing to do with me." Klein saw Alice's problem-solving approach. He frowned for a moment, then chose to let it go. She seems to know she made a mistake, scolding her is pointless. Besides, this loss really shouldn't be borne by me. Mr. Fool, having evaded a payment, was very happy and chuckled softly. "Don't let it happen again." Alice, who had been smug a second ago, shrank her neck and lowered her head the next. After some thought, she secretly glanced at Alger, who was taking the blame. Alger seemed very accustomed to this task, he appeared to have no complaints about it. But then Mr. Hanged Man would be at a loss. Alice looked at Alger thoughtfully and offered a suggestion. "Regarding the money you spent buying the diary, you can pray to me after you go back, then play a couple of rounds at the casino." This was not something the old Alice would have said. Alger, for a moment, raised his head, unable to hide his surprise. After meeting Alice's gaze, he lowered his head again. He wouldn't change his principles of conduct because of this slight change in Alice. However, Alice's changed attitude coupled with the sense of security brought by Mr. Fool made Alger decide to follow Alice's advice. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Fate," he said, "I will try it after I return." He decided to try praying to Alice first. His courage came from many aspects. Alice's changed attitude was one, the sense of security brought by Mr. Fool was another, and there was actually a third, unknown point. He had heard a very strange rumor in Byam, claiming that the mad adventurer Gehrman Sparrow was the lover of a blonde girl. Oh, yes, after Alice had an outburst, the primary and secondary relationship in this rumor was altered. Chapter 352 Chapter 35 I worked hard today. Alice, allowing such rumors to spread, gave Alger a subtle sense of security. He hadn't considered the possibility that neither Alice nor the world knew about the rumor. The world not knowing was still excusable, but how could Miss Fate, who had reclaimed her authority, not know even this? Regardless, the matter ended here. At Mr. Fool's signal, this tarot club officially began. Alice raised a hand and asked the question she had wanted to ask all along. Have any of you seen an honorific name like this? Or a holy book like this? The image of Cassandra was materialized by Alice, appearing along with that incomprehensible honorific name. I think this should be considered a Class 0 sealed artifact, Alice introduced Cassandra amidst everyone's silence. It should come from a soothsayer, a sequence 2 angel. After a pause, Alice added, oh, if you've seen other soothsayer sealed artifacts, you can also tell me. This was something Alice suddenly thought of. Although the original intention of investigating Cassandra wasn't for potion ingredients, it had to be said that if she obtained Cassandra, it would indeed solve the main ingredient for sequence 2. Though the auxiliary materials at that time might be even more troublesome. But that wasn't a problem Alice needed to worry about now. She just suddenly thought of it, she could ask about it incidentally. Were her main ingredients for sequence 4 not complete yet? Alice blinked innocently twice. This news was actually easier to gather than the news of Cassandra running around everywhere. Catlia raised her hand and said, I once saw a sealed artifact called the Eye of the Prophet. This is a bloodshot eyeball. By making eye contact with the Eye of the Prophet, one can randomly glimpse 1 to 6 futures, one of which is inevitably your death. The Eye of the Prophet will continue to watch you until your predicted death comes true. It is said there are other side effects, but I am not aware of them. Alice propped her chin thoughtfully, while Audrey, seizing the moment of her contemplation, raised her hand and asked, Madam Hermit, what if I only see one future? Then you will see your death, Catlia replied without hesitation. That's a bit too. Audrey frowned, trying to find a suitable adjective. Alice glanced at Audrey. Although she understood what she wanted to express, she didn't feel there was anything wrong with it at all. She shrugged and said, if someone only sees one future, then he can only blame his bad luck for encountering a sealed artifact from the fate pathway. Saying he's courting death seems too harsh. How about this? He voluntarily stepped onto the staircase built for him by death, what can you or I do? Question mark. Audrey actually understood what Alice wanted to convey, but her last sentence sounded quite out of character for her usual image. It wasn't as if it was completely different. They had all more or less heard things from Alice that they didn't think much of at the time but later realized had deeper meanings. But Alice mostly blurted things out unconsciously, whereas this statement seemed a bit too eager to perform. She seemed to be deliberately conforming to a certain image. With the acting method in mind, Audrey deliberated and asked, is Soothsayer the name of your sequence 2 potion? Alice nodded. Is Miss Fate trying to act as a soothsayer? Such a guess didn't just come from Audrey. In fact, everyone made this guess, except for Emlyn, whose brain was truly smooth. Emlyn was currently considering what material to look up later. Seeing the topic stray further and further, only Klein still remembered Alice's question. The reason was that he couldn't forget that Alice hadn't told him about this beforehand. He'd postponed thinking of honorific names for her for a while. No, wait, was she not in a hurry at all? Klein felt a moment of silence, but he still dutifully controlled the world to remind her. Miss Fate, aren't you going to describe the abilities or side effects of that sealed artifact, or other characteristics? Alice expressionlessly turned her head and asked back without much emotion. Do you think I don't want to? So far, my understanding of it is limited to what you all know. And also, that thing might be alive in some sense, and it knows me. The matter of Cassandra acting as a soothsayer hovered on Alice's lips for a moment, then she swallowed it back. She inexplicably didn't want to reveal this matter. The prophecy of the soothsayer had, in a way, given Alice a reminder. Some things work better when fewer people know about them. And the soothsayer, whose name already exuded mystery, possessed such special abilities, and the ritual for advancing to sequence 1 was filled with a sense of feigning death to escape. Alice threw the thought of, he chases her, she flees, she can't escape even with wings, out of her mind. What was that? Alice patted her head, bringing her thoughts back on track. In short, perhaps the soothsayer's acting method also works better when fewer people know about it. At least Alice could be sure that if the soothsayer's acting truly required a protagonist, then the protagonist absolutely must not know about this. After all, she had never heard of a protagonist in any story serving as a tool for a soothsayer. All along, the role that walks on the edge of the story, like a golden finger and like a tool, has always been the soothsayer, hasn't it? Thinking of this, Alice's spirituality was suddenly touched. She almost instantly reacted, realizing that she might have vaguely touched upon a certain key point. What was it? Couldn't figure it out, so she stopped thinking. Alice, who was best at giving up on thinking, decisively chose to give up. She looked at everyone, who were completely clueless, but wasn't too disappointed. She already had a premonition, even if she tried hard, it would be difficult to find clues related to Cassandra. Therefore, asking a question at the Tarot Club was her greatest effort. She didn't even give up directly. Alice, feeling that she had tried very hard, nodded, fully affirming her actions, and then confidently asked the members of the Tarot Club. You all, do you think I can write in the Holy Book? Trash cans cannot hold trash, beds cannot have people on them, tables cannot have things on them. If I write this as a dogma, how about? Miss Fate, the world sneered and reminded her, you will make me suspect that you are very nostalgic for a certain past experience and very much want to experience it again. End of this chapter. Chapter 353 Chapter 36 Why not ask Mr. Fool? Alice decisively and swiftly reached out to cover her mouth. Then she felt something was off and half opened her fingers, letting out a sound through the gaps. No, thank you. I don't miss it at all. She firmly rejected the proposal from World. Their exchange made others realize that this rule wasn't Alice's whim, it seemed to represent something, heaven knows, they initially thought it was another one of Miss Fate's crazy ideas. No one would think this was some mysterious ritual, mainly due to Alice's behavior in the Tarot Club. During the Tarot Club's usual casual chat sessions, before the arrival of Madame Hermit, the usual storyteller was the well-informed Mr. Hangman. Although World's experiences should also be rich, most of the time, World didn't like to talk. He mainly stopped Alice's bizarre remarks. And after Madame Hermit arrived, the main storytellers became Mr. Hangman and Madame Hermit, while only Alice would still occasionally have a flash of inspiration and say some very strange things, which would then be stopped by World. For example, Alice once asked Emlyn, the moon, if vampires couldn't taste human food, otherwise, why were potions so awful? Then Audrey was surprised to learn that vampires also ate human food, probably like humans eating snacks. This analogy was also given by Alice. Of course, Alice occasionally made some unexpected suggestions. For example, after learning that the forsaken land of the gods needed to rely on unpleasant black-faced grass to survive, Alice once asked in confusion. Since that's the case, why don't you ask Mr. Fool to bestow food upon you? How could a deity's grace be used for such things? This feeling was as horrifying as Audrey one day discovering that it wasn't Mr. Fool's dependents who needed activity funds, but Mr. Fool himself. How could a deity be associated with such mundane things? Alice was an exception. Derek, the son, of course, also rejected Alice's words, because Alice's suggestion wasn't as simple as Mr. Fool delivering food. She suggested that the City of Silver order takeout through Mr. Fool. When she tried to show Derek the menu, World stopped the matter, and Derek breathed a sigh of relief, thanking Alice for her kindness while rejecting her. Who would actually ask a true god to deliver takeout for them? Alice didn't understand this. After all, the Tarot Club's transactions, in her opinion, were like express delivery. Since Mr. Fool was already a courier, delivering takeout wasn't out of the ordinary. After observing the expressions of the others, Alice rationally didn't ask the question aloud. It seemed like only she thought this was normal. Although she didn't understand what exactly was abnormal, she probably wouldn't understand even if she asked. So forget it. With such a peculiar personality, it was understandable that Alice occasionally thought of strange things. But World's words made the Tarot Club members realize that things were not so simple. At a moment when everyone had different thoughts, Emlyn, the moon, blurted out. What past? Why are you two being so mysterious? At these words, even Alger, the hanged man, who was always emotionally reserved, and Catlia, the hermit, couldn't help but glance at Emlyn. So Emlyn asked, "Why are you all looking at me?" "They are expressing their gratitude and admiration for you," said Alice, whose brain capacity was much larger than Emlyn's. "Your courage has won you all this. You are indeed the savior of the sanguine in the prophecy." To match the content of these words, Alice replaced her usual, vampire, with, sanguine. This successfully made Emlyn feel flattered. He proudly puffed out his chest, momentarily forgetting his initial confusion. "That's right, we sanguine." Then came more incomprehensible words such as, ancient race, and, noble existence. No one laughed out loud in front of Emlyn, but above the gray fog was filled with a joyful atmosphere for a while. Looking at her, "She's actually quite clever." Klein looked at Alice, who was perfunctorily nodding in the gray fog, then at Emlyn, who was pontificating, and a smile curled on his lips. Alice didn't know that someone had just weighed and compared her brain and Emlyn's cerebellum. She simply moved past the previous dangerous topic after Emlyn finished bragging and asked, "Madam Hermit, do you know how to transmit information while avoiding the hidden sage's gaze?" Catlia, the hermit, looked at the indistinct Klein in the gray fog with slight hesitation, then replied, "If I knew, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have alarmed Mr. Fool due to the hidden sage's pursuit, thus being lured into the tarot club and becoming a member of a secret organization." Catlia didn't say it aloud, but Alice felt she understood. She raised her chin slightly and asked, "What, do you regret it?" Alice's tone was flat, and her gaze sweeping over Catlia was casual, with no malice revealed, but for a moment, Catlia felt something terrifying was staring at her. "Of course not," she denied. "This is my honor, and also my opportunity." After a pause, to enhance the credibility of her words, she added, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't know how long it would take to find traces of a mythical creature's blood." These words were originally just to humor Alice, but as they fell, Catlia suddenly realized they were true. In a sense, being unexpectedly drawn into the tarot club and witnessing the revival of one, or possibly two deities, could indeed be called an opportunity. The prerequisite was that the deity she followed succeeded in revival, and this deity couldn't be two. Catlia subtly glanced at Alice. Alice thoughtfully scanned Catlia. Her words weren't entirely sincere, at least, if she had a choice, Alice was sure she wouldn't accept such help. It didn't matter, she had no choice anyway. Alice looked at Catlia with a half smile, scrutinizing her from head to toe with the same gaze Klein used for gold pounds. As Catlia felt a chill down her spine, Alice spoke. "All right, I'll take your word for it. So you don't know how to block the hidden sage's gaze." Catlia again glanced with slight hesitation at Mr. Fool, who remained impassive in the gray fog. End of chapter. Chapter 354. Chapter 37. Russell's famous quote. Alice blinked twice, finally realizing what Catlia was trying to express. When she almost lost control due to the influence of the hidden sage, it was clearly Klein's action of pulling her above the gray fog that saved her. "Oh, this." Alice began to think about how to smooth things over. "So annoying, can't I just not smooth things over for him?" Alice sighed inwardly, then lifted her chin and said stubbornly, "I don't need his help. I can do it myself." Her stubbornness was so convincing that for a moment, Klein almost believed her nonsense. If Alice hadn't left all the matters of honorific name to him. However, she has really improved a lot. I'm not surprised that she can act, but she actually didn't expose me and instead actively helped me cover up the lie. Although this was originally due to her carelessness. But it's enough that she remembers to deal with the trouble she caused, as long as it's not like before. Klein looked at Alice, and remembering Eamon, who was still on the Storm Church's wanted list, a sense of relief suddenly rose in his heart. Catlia looked at Alice with a hesitant expression, then looked at Mr. Fool and World, who had no intention of speaking, and after a moment of silence, encouraged her. "I believe you will definitely find a way, Miss Fate." She seemed to completely believe Alice's acting. It should be said that the only one here who vaguely noticed something was Justice Audrey. It wasn't that Alice's expression and tone were problematic, she had always been very good at imitation, and mimicking others' expressions and tones was effortless for her. For Audrey, the incongruity of this matter was, it didn't fit the persona. Didn't Miss Fate always want to dump everything on others? Although such a stubborn act of wanting to do things herself wasn't entirely inconsistent with Alice's personality, firstly, Audrey wanted to know why Alice had such a thought, and secondly, she always felt that even if Alice did have such a thought, she would abandon it after merely thinking about it. Audrey didn't voice her doubts, merely sat by, maintaining a smile, acting as a qualified spectator. Although it was just to cope, it must be admitted that Alice was indeed pleased by Catlia's words. She gave Catlia an appreciative look, as if to say, "You are very sensible." Catlia didn't know what to say. She silently lowered her head. The Tarot Club fell silent again. After a brief pause, Alger proactively brought up a new topic. "Miss Fate, if we encounter Russell's diary compiled by you again next time, how should we distinguish it?" "Oh, right." Alice put a hand to her chin, "But I only wrote 2 pages. It's fine if you remember those 2 pages and compare them each time, right?" Very reasonable. Alger was forced to agree to this. Looking at the others who had no intention of speaking, Magician Furs plucked up her courage and spoke, attempting to lighten her workload. "Miss Fate, we are not as familiar with Loan language as you are, and cannot memorize the content of the diary. We can only forcefully remember the appearance of the characters on it, which is a huge burden for us. It's very difficult for us to always remember a certain page of the diary, let alone take it out to compare every time we see a new diary, but we can't pray to Mr. Fool every time to restore our memory. Do you have a simpler way to help us distinguish those 2 pages of the diary?" Alice looked at Furs with a puzzled expression and wondered. "Then when you see a new diary, how do you confirm that you haven't handed in this page before? Did you just hand it in without distinguishing it at all?" Justice Audrey, next to Alice, lowered her head, unable to bear looking at Furs. Hermit Catlia and Hanged Man Alger also averted their gazes. Son Derek imitated the actions of his seniors and averted his gaze. "What's wrong with them?" Moon Emlyn looked around in confusion, then also averted his gaze. Klein thought for a moment, then manipulated, whirled, to speak and stop her. "Miss Fate, I remember you made a mark, right? You seem to have said that there was a sentence on those 2 pages of the diary that was a modified famous quote from Emperor Rosal, and you could recognize it just by seeing it. Question mark. Alice was stunned for 2 seconds, then realized that this famous quote should refer to, "The taste of a witch is really good." That really was a famous quote, and possibly the only famous quote the Emperor said himself. Alice pulled out a smile with complicated feelings and said, "Yes, there is such a thing. I'll teach you those 3 sentences." After teaching the members of the Tarot Club the characters for, "The taste of a witch is really good," "The taste of an iron-blooded knight is really good," and, "The taste of a faceless is really good," in sequence, Alice pointed to, "The taste of a witch is really good," and said, "This is Emperor Rosal's original words, and the other 2 sentences are adapted from this sentence." Everyone remembered this, and among them, good student Audrey raised her hand, seemingly having something to ask. Alice gently nodded, signaling her to speak. "Miss Fate," Audrey asked a question Alice didn't want to face, "what does this sentence mean?" Alice fell into contemplation. And with Audrey's question, everyone looked at Alice, and even Hermit Catlia seemed very eager to know what this sentence meant. No, it's normal for her to be curious. Maybe she plans to tell Bernadette. Alice looked at Klein, hidden in the gray fog. Very good, the corners of his mouth were curved high, and he seemed to be anticipating how she would answer. She couldn't tell the truth, could she? Alice was silent, Alice hesitated, Alice was conflicted. This isn't appropriate, is it? Alice gritted her teeth, thinking while trying to stall for time. This sentence is Emperor Rosal's. It's a kind of life attitude of Emperor Rosal. The meaning of this sentence is, the meaning is, translated into Loan language, it should be. What to do? I can't stall any longer, help me, Klein. Alice was frantic. Klein obviously noticed this too, and he was also thinking about what would be appropriate to say. He couldn't really tell the truth. But actually, it's best if it's somewhat related. The taste of a witch is really good. Witch. Assassin. I remember the Emperor wrote many books describing assassins. Klein chuckled softly, covering up the lie for Alice. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. End of this chapter. Chapter 355 Chapter 38 Derek's Request. So it's this line, it seems to be from one of Emperor Rosal's books, but, is there anything wrong with this line? Why does Miss Fate look so troubled? Such a thought flashed through Audrey's mind, and then she saw Alice pat her chest, let out a breath, and muttered. So that's how it's translated. So that's how it is. Miss Fate understood it, but didn't know how to translate it into Loan language. If it's Miss Fate, it doesn't seem strange. Alice's act of slandering herself brought a relatively satisfactory end to the matter. Although Katlia still looked at Alice with a puzzled expression, they all accepted this explanation. After all, unlike Mr. Fool, who was presumably a respected elder, Alice, she didn't look cultured at all. Alice, of course, saw what the others were thinking. Although this was a decision she made on a whim, when she realized that the image she had left behind was indeed like this, she secretly gnashed her teeth. So annoying, Alice's hand under the table gripped the chair tightly. She restrained her desire to glare at Klein and decided to cause him some trouble if she had the chance later. It must be his fault. The good news was that her bristling attitude successfully deterred Audrey, who still wanted to ask what the other two sentences meant. Although curious, Audrey also understood that attracting Alice's attention at such a time was not a good idea. And without Audrey, aside from Emlyn, even if the others were curious, it was impossible for them to ask proactively. The only one who might ask, Moon, Emlyn, was not very interested in this. The matter ended like this. After realizing that no one else was speaking, son, Derek thought for a moment, raised his hand, and asked, choosing his words carefully. In a recent patrol mission, I encountered a very special situation. Our patrol team suddenly became very unlucky when passing through a ruin. They choked while drinking water, and gagged while eating. This situation didn't last long, about a day, but every patrol team that passed through that ruin encountered this situation, and outside the city of Silver, this misfortune would develop into a very dangerous situation, such as lights suddenly going out, or suddenly encountering a monster. Although no one has made a mistake in combat yet, I'm worried. Although he didn't specifically name anyone, Derek's pleading gaze this time landed accurately on Alice. In his hesitant eyes, Alice had no choice but to remind him. It's no use looking at me, I can't hear your prayers outside, but I don't know how to get there. I can't ask Eamon to take me there, can I? They had experimented with this. Actually, for a moment, Alice really wanted to ask Derek why he didn't ask Klein. After all, his honorific name included, the yellow and black king who holds good luck, but she quickly held back. After all, Mr. Fool currently did not have the ability to control good luck, and if someone asked about it, it would be quite awkward. Suppressing the dangerous thought, Alice continued. You can wait a bit, wait until I find a way to get to your side. Or wait until Mr. Fool recovers a bit more, enough to send people over. Recalling Klein's ability to receive prayers from the forsaken land of the gods and respond to rituals there, Alice glanced at him. It shouldn't be because of him, no, that's nonsense. He doesn't have the ability to receive prayers at all. It must be because of Saphira Castle. If so, why can't Key of Light? Is it the difference between a pillar level and an outer deity level? Or is it? Alice gently pursed her lips, recalling the power that seemed to be calling her. Combined with her understanding of the Beander characteristic convergence law, Alice suspected that she only carried a part of Key of Light's power, not the complete one, and it might not even be the main body. The true Key of Light was actually still sealed in the West Continent. This was also one of the goddess's initial guesses about her situation. Another possibility was that she was a fragment of Key of Light that had escaped, but she had once existed as a uniqueness, and Alice insisted that she was definitely human at first, so this possibility was temporarily ruled out. However, if that's really the case, I should really go to the forsaken land of the gods to take a look. It borders the West Continent after all, and perhaps I can get more clues. Then return that damned birthday present to him. Thinking of this, Alice clenched her fist tightly, raised her head, and smiled. For now, avoid that place. If you need it, I can provide you with talismans to dispel misfortune, as long as you don't have money. Alice looked at Derek, whose currency was not accepted, and fell into thought. Derek, realizing that this matter could not be resolved for the time being, had not yet had time to feel disappointed when he heard good news, and then the good news turned into bad news. He said unwillingly, I can provide beyond characteristic, provide various materials. I can sell them on your behalf. Alger also tried to profit from this transaction. Alice shook her head and smiled at Derek. Perhaps you are just worried about your friends, but for Mr. Fool's sake, and since this is the first time, I refuse you this time. Next time, there won't be such a good thing. After all, you have no reason to take out so many talismans to dispel misfortune, and even less reason to demand benefits from others, right? Fate is not a philanthropist, so, in order to repay the price, you absolutely must not be a philanthropist, my dear Mr. Sun. Alice's tone carried a hint of intimacy, but her eyes when looking at Derek were colder and more warning than before. Derek realized in that gaze that Miss Fate was not as easy to talk to as Mr. Fool. Temporarily owing something to Mr. Fool, judging from past performance, would not have too severe consequences, as long as they didn't really plan to run away. But, if one temporarily owed Miss Fate, unfortunately, Alice's past performance would only make people feel that she might suddenly go back on her word at any time, and then demand a reward you absolutely did not want to pay. The capriciousness of fate was perfectly embodied in her. Thinking of this, Derek stood up and thanked her solemnly. Thank you for your reminder, merciful Miss Fate. Is he talking about me? He really is talking about me, right? Hermit, lady aside, why is little son also? Alice, who had a clear understanding of herself, raised her head hesitantly, blinked twice, and asked uncertainly. Me, merciful. End of this chapter. Chapter 356 Chapter 39 Inches Mom. The Tarot Club meeting concluded with Alice feeling bewildered and conflicted. Derek was quite different from Hermit, Catlia, Hanged Man, Alger, and even Justice, Audrey. Although he might have been echoing someone else's words, it at least indicated that Derek probably genuinely found her benevolent when he spoke. He praised me like that, huh? Maybe I should treat him better from now on. Amidst Alice's internal struggle, Klein announced the end of the Tarot Club, then looked at her, still deep in thought, and questioned. Why didn't you tell me about that book and that honorific name? Huh? Alice looked up, bewildered. Klein materialized the image of the book, then stared at her and asked. Why haven't you told me about this? Alice fell silent for a moment, then said with some hesitation. You know, Cassandra, that is, the book, is at sequence 2, right? Cassandra. Klein repeated, puzzled. Alice sighed, explaining with a touch of helplessness. The cursed soothsayer, the soothsayer, who died by her own prophecy. I guess that's what it is. Anyway, that's what the book calls herself. Hey, you really know she's at sequence 2, right? Even if I told you I was looking for an angel-level sealed artifact, you wouldn't be able to do anything. At most, it would just be another source of information like Erode's. Oh, wait, he actually seems to have an angel-level attendant. Alice looked down at herself, lost in thought. Roughly speaking, she should also be considered an angel under the Fool. So, Alice solemnly raised her head and said indignantly. How can your fool church use child labor? Klein felt he didn't understand Alice's words. He made a sound of not understanding. Huh, how did the topic jump here? Is there any connection between her two sentences? Is the child labor she's referring to herself? Klein's expression was full of bewilderment. After looking at him for 2 seconds, Alice tried to explain the process she had omitted. That is, I should be considered your angel-level attendant, right? That certainly counts. So the child labor indeed refers to her, an underage angel. That book is a sequence 2 level, soothsayer. Klein believed he understood Alice's logic. He looked at Alice, thought for 2 seconds, then suggested. If I remember correctly, you don't have a diploma, do you? Have you ever considered going to? No. Alice shrieked excitedly, don't even think about it. What angel goes to high school? Alice, who ate on time, slept early, and diligently practiced everything a child her age should do, excitedly refused the most important thing. Sometimes talking to you is harder than learning a foreign language, said Klein, who had self-taught several foreign languages such as Giant Language and Elvish, studied several more in class, and currently mastered a total of 9 languages, including Loan language, Chinese, and English. Note 1. Alice rested her hand on her chin, lowered her head, and changed the subject. In short, Cassandra is at a level as high as sequence 2. And it's not even certain if there aren't other strange things mixed in. In this situation, even if I told you, it probably wouldn't be of much use. Indeed, even if she told me, at most I could just help her ask around, and also, she probably isn't very good at normal reasoning. Does she really need reasoning? Klein glanced at Alice, then shifted his gaze. She doesn't really need reasoning, does she? No, it sounds like she doesn't need anything, she just needs to wait until the time is right. Recalling Alice's several bizarre experiences, Klein's mood was inexplicably complex for a moment. He couldn't help but ask with a hint of emotion. Do you really need to look for that, Cassandra? I always feel like it will be delivered to you for some strange reason. Alice shrugged and said, isn't it already delivered? It's not thoroughly delivered, is it? Klein thought for a moment and said, you used to just have it drop directly into your mouth. Alice remained silent. She decided that she shouldn't be the only one whose heart was pierced, she would pierce Klein's as well. Thinking of this, Alice's eyes became firm, then that emotion dissipated. She looked at Klein with a deep, sticky gaze and called out with a voice full of twists and turns. Mother. On March 21, 1350, in the fifth epoch, within Mr. Fool's divine kingdom, Miss Fate, grateful for Mr. Fool's long-standing care, affectionately called out the title Mr. Fool had always desired but dared not accept. Mother. Despite being an ancient deity, Mr. Fool was still incredibly excited at this moment, falling off his chair with emotion. Miss Fate immediately shed worried tears. She bit her lip, and although she did not get up, her gaze never left Mr. Fool, watching him get up from the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably during the process. Stop laughing, Alice. Klein, who had climbed up from the ground above the gray fog, roared, Are you FC King sick? Alice no longer held back. She immediately gave up biting her lip to stifle her laughter, covering her stomach with her left hand and slapping the table with her right, bursting into hearty laughter. Above the gray fog was filled with joy for a time. A world where only Alice was happy had been achieved. Klein was helpless about this. After all, not long before, he had been sad because Alice's first reaction wasn't to ask him for help. Klein couldn't refute Alice's words, because after careful recollection, he found that he really seemed to be fulfilling the duties of a mother. Looking at Alice, who was still laughing heartily, Klein gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and showed a gentle smile, saying, Alice, since you call me mother, then I think I should also fulfill the responsibility of educating you on behalf of your mother. I can't just watch you fall. I think. No need. Alice immediately stopped smiling and sat up straight. Mr. Moretti, or Mr. Joe, I don't think we're that familiar yet. Her tone changed so quickly. Klein shook his head. Seeing her return to normal, he no longer joked with her but asked in a deep voice. About that book. Are you sure you can handle it? He's concerned about me. Alice smiled, seeing the worry in Klein's eyes, and waved her hand in a good mood, saying, Relax. Even if you don't act as my mother, I can still call the goddess mother. I hope the goddess is still willing to acknowledge me. End of chapter. Chapter 357 Chapter 40 Miss Destiny's last name is Yeluolilan. Alice's attitude when she finally returned to the real world could be described as exasperated. After she proposed the idea of seeking help from the goddess of fate, Klein looked at her with sincere eyes and advised. You'd better hope the goddess of fate doesn't want to acknowledge you. Otherwise, she might kill you. Alice ran away as if a sore spot had been poked. After all, the demonic wolf's fur. I wonder what Klein's mythical creature form is like. In the real world, Alice's eyes showed a faint excitement. But before Alice could let her imagination run wild, she discovered something terrifying. After Mr. Fool got off work, she had to start working. Forever innocent child. The embodiment of luck and miracles. The origin of misfortune and chaos. Who? She wasn't Mr. Fool, who was forced to do everything himself, normally, prayers and rituals. Oh, Mr. Hanged Man, that was indeed not a normal situation. Why was he praying to me? It's clearly like them seeing me and me seeing Amen. Alice, who had forgotten what she had promised, listened carefully to the content of Mr. Hanged Man Alger's prayer with a puzzled expression. Alger Wilson tried praying the first thing after returning to reality. After setting up the ritual, Alger recited the standard incantation step by step, and then gave a lengthy speech, the central idea of which was to praise Alice's benevolence using the diary incident as an example. Alice listened to Alger's speech dumbfounded before asking in surprise, "Are the bishops of your storm church really so eloquent? Do the angels of your fate pathway actually chat with their believers through prayer channels?" Despite having never heard of this, Alger dutifully continued the conversation. "I don't think so. Most of my colleagues and superiors are not very good with words." "What about acting?" Alice pressed. "Your acting is also very good. And it's also very cunning. I've learned a lot from you. But other Storm Church believers don't seem to be like that. How can even she tell I'm acting?" Alger frowned inwardly, but showed no expression on his face, and began to sweat profusely as he heard the latter half of Alice's sentence. "Does Mr. Fool know she's learning from me?" Alger wanted to ask, but Alger dared not ask. Alger could only listen to Alice continue to mumble. "Actually, I think, sometimes even Mr. Fool. Miss Fate." Alger no longer cared if this would affect Alice's mood. He immediately interrupted Alice. "How much money should I win when I go to the casino?" "Ah." Alice stroked her chin. 20. "No, 30 pounds. As she spoke, she drew a small splash on Alger's fate. After a moment of thought, she added a rolling stone mechanism to the end before blinking and saying, "Don't win too much." Her tone was light and quick, tinged with a suppressed excitement and anticipation. Alger immediately realized that if he didn't act according to Alice's warning, something that would please Alice would happen. What would please her? Alger didn't know, but Alger was very sure that it would definitely not be a good thing for him. However, if the object was her, Alger's heart stirred, and he asked as if joking, "Oh, what would happen if I really did that? Do you know, Miss Fate?" "I don't know," Alice replied self-righteously. "You might die. Or win a huge sum of money, and then die of happiness." Die of happiness. Alger's mouth twitched. He realized that this was probably not an exaggeration like, "I'm so happy I could die," but another way of saying, extreme joy begets sorrow. He thanked her in a deep voice. "Thank you for informing me, praise be to the great Miss Fate." Hearing this title again, even though Alice herself had requested it initially, she still couldn't help but choke a little and say, "Why don't you just call me Princess Yellorylin? Praise be to you, Princess Yellorylin." Alger readily changed his lines. Alice was choked. She didn't know that Alger wasn't treating this as a joke and was genuinely pondering where the surname she had casually blurted out actually came from. Such a strange pronunciation, not like the pronunciation habits of the Loan language. "Don't call that name," Alice shrieked, "and don't call it in front of me." It seems she really was just joking. Alger remained silent, not pointing out that this was actually Alice's request. How could Miss Fate be wrong? It must be me, hanged man Alger, who misunderstood Miss Fate's intention. This was the change Alger had decided to make after Eamon stole from the Storm Church's donation box. In any case, this after-sales service ended with Alice's completely out of it responses. Soon after, Alger, walking out of the casino with 30 pounds, sincerely praised Alice again, then speculated in his heart. "So, where is Yellorylin from? Miss Fate calls herself a princess. Is this the surname of a royal family from some country? Actually, it could also just be a name, but it's probably more likely to be a surname. A name also seems possible. Miss Fate isn't a true god yet, is she? And this pronunciation, what language is this pronunciation from? So, square. Furthermore, Miss Fate seems to dislike this name very much. This is the first time she's mentioned it, and she clearly doesn't like being called that. Perhaps the memories associated with this surname are not pleasant. For example, that country has already been destroyed. Or does this name represent some unpleasant memory? After all, royalty. All sorts of conjectures surged in Alger's heart. He seriously pondered what the name Alice had inadvertently blurted out represented, never considering another possibility, that this word was actually made up by Chunabu girls in the 21st century. Alice also didn't know that the name she had made up had been given such important significance. If she had known, she would have spoken cautiously, and even more cautiously. But it was too late. Alger had completely misunderstood her words, and she had never considered this possibility. Unaware of anything, she heard another prayer. Slumbering goddess of fate, you are the master of luck and misfortune. You are the inevitability of all accidents. Evidently, this prayer came from someone Alice had specifically marked. End of chapter. Chapter 358. Chapter 41. Doomed to fail. Didn't he go to the night church for help before because he was scared? Why is he back again? Alice frowned, looking along the prayer passage, but found it was a similar ritual site, also with a bottle of potion, and even the prayer words were almost the same. So, why did he start praying to her again? No, for the night church, praying to her again is actually quite normal, so how exactly should she give him courage? Alice looked around blankly, then asked again. I can only bestow you luck. I completely don't know how to bestow you courage. She couldn't really just pour the potion down his throat, could she? Alice's mumbling wasn't heard by him. This time, the unfamiliar supplicant didn't rise in terror and flee, but continued to repeat his previous words. I beg you to bestow me luck. I beg you to bestow me courage. I beg you to let me drink the potion smoothly. Is he a repeater? Alice listened to the man's prayer with incomprehension, and just as she was about to question something, she heard the man change his tone. I no longer remember how many times I've tried this, but no matter how many times, the outcome always seems to be the same. Every time, for various reasons, I am unable to successfully take the potion. At first, it was all sorts of accidents, for example, mistakes during the potion brewing process, problems arising. This is also the most common accident. Sometimes other accidents would happen, for example, once a detestable marauder stole a bottle of marauder potion. What a perfect match. After so many times, I gradually lost the courage to take the potion. I always feel that perhaps this is the goddess of fate's favor upon me, allowing me to avoid taking the potion, otherwise something terrible would happen. For example, as you should know, I might lose control. Every time I thought of this possibility, I had even less courage to take the potion, until not long ago, the marauder who stole the marauder potion appeared before me again. That damned marauder left me a ritual. He told me that there is a sleeping goddess of fate who controls the destiny of this world, and that whoever awakens her will receive her favor, and I am the one chosen by destiny. When I first heard such words, I don't know why I was very excited and believed them to be true. I tried to perform the ritual she told me, and the moment you responded to me, I instantly sobered up, realizing that I might have been deceived. I imagine you witnessed my disgraceful flight at that time. I am very sorry, I did not intend for you to witness all of this. At that time, I did not know that you were a favored one of the goddess. I thought my ritual pointed to an unknown evil god, so I hastily went to the night church for help. If you are willing to let bygones be bygones and help me take the potion, I am willing to donate a sum of money to the night church to do my small part. Of course, this is not a transaction or a threat. I am a devout follower of the goddess myself, and I often donate to the night church. Unable to successfully take the potion for various reasons, Alice blinked, and the man's possible future appeared before her. He was right. The future visions were almost uniformly of losing control. The possibility of becoming a Beander was slim, and most had various after effects. In a sense, he probably really could be considered favored by destiny. But this also showed that he must particularly want to become a Beander, otherwise, he wouldn't fail again and then buy materials again and again to try and brew the potion. After all, buying potions costs a lot. How much money is he planning to donate? 1 second, Alice was still considering the possibility that the marauder who stole the marauder potion was Sylvia. The next second her attention was drawn away by the man's words, and she began to think about how much money the man planned to donate to the night church. She didn't pay much attention to the man's momentary slip of the tongue, which sounded like a threat, because she understood such things. Daily donations are daily donations, and asking for something is asking for something. The two are definitely not the same. What she was actually concerned about was another question: why not donate to me? As soon as this thought appeared, Alice's eyes lit up. Yes, it was clearly her work, so why not charge money? She restrained her desire to ask the man exactly how much money he intended to donate, and instead chuckled softly, saying, "Praying to destiny for help comes at a cost. Are you ready for the price?" The man paused slightly, and Alice transmitted the contents of the sacrificial ritual into the man's mind along the prayer passage, saying indifferently, "First, let me see if the price you pay can satisfy me." After hesitating for a moment, Alice still didn't do something as absurd as reaching out for money, deciding to let him guess. After all, he was already planning to pray for the favor of destiny, so how could it be acceptable if he couldn't guess the will of destiny or understand what price destiny wanted? Miss Fate nodded complacently, then began to think about another matter. Surely the goddess is my favored one, right? Alice stamped her foot, extremely dissatisfied with the title she had received. Her favored one had become a god, she hadn't yet, and hadn't even managed to become a subordinate god. Aemon must never know about this. Recalling how she had mocked Aemon, a born mythical creature, for not having become a god even now, Alice silently lowered her head. However, Alice put a hand to her chin, stealing a marauder potion to become a marauder. That's truly a dramatic turn of events. Already knowing the names of the two Beander sequences after marauder, Alice could make more inferences from it. If following this line of thought, her swindler potion, or the potion formula and materials, were they obtained through swindling? What about cryptologist? What secret does she need to decipher? She shouldn't be able to get the cryptologist potion, right? Recalling the clue she had given, Alice fell silent for a moment. She took a breath and said, "Actually, this also counts as deciphering, discerning that the clue has a problem, discerning that her golden finger has a problem. This should also count as deciphering, right?" Peeling back the superficial disguise to see the truth, if following this line of thought, she definitely won't be able to get the cryptologist potion, because she has already failed. She deeply believes in Cassandra. However, if she really believed my words and went to explore Amon's tomb, then she should achieve success in another sense. After all, in that case, if she succeeds in the exploration, she has the potential to become a demigod. If she fails in the exploration, she will become a demigod. End of chapter. Chapter 359, Chapter 42, The Web of Fate, Elegy of the Red Moon. "I like this story," Alice murmured. "No matter what the truth is, I like this story. The marauder potion stolen, the swindler potion conned, and the cryptologist potion narrowly missed due to a mistaken decryption. Oh, she just hoped she could see her last wish before she died. That would be a perfect ending." So, Alice looked up at the ceiling, a new question forming in her mind. A story like this, an ending like this, was it accidentally brought about by Cassandra, or was it intentional? It was a question, but Alice's tone was actually very certain. She hadn't forgotten that high sequences could affect low sequences. According to this principle, Cassandra at most chose such an ending without realizing the impact. But no matter what, this choice must have been made by her own volition. Only then would the nature of this matter seem sufficiently malicious. Whether Cassandra was truly playing the soothsayer or not, Sylvia was merely a toy. Serious thoughts only lasted for a moment before Alice quickly started letting her mind wander again. If we follow this line of thought, then does every deity in this world have a fixed personality template? The higher the sequence, the closer they get to this personality template, and eventually everyone ends up with more or less the same personality. Looking at it this way, this world is so strange. It was initially like a huge jigsaw puzzle, with many pieces scattered. Becoming a god means making yourself more and more like a piece of that puzzle. If we put enough puzzle pieces together, we can easily see what the missing pieces look like, which means the original would be easier to revive. However, a puzzle is still too simple. This might be an educational building block game, the kind with diagrams, but each block has to be made by oneself, and we are the chosen raw materials. Hearing myself say it, I actually want to play too. A terrifying question kept popping up in her mind, and Alice tried her best to shift her attention from, who is playing the building block game, to, I want to play too. Perhaps the child currently playing the building block game would be kinder to raw materials or blocks that resembled her. No, it could actually be worse. After all, children are the most unpredictable creatures in this world. Wait, why does it feel like I'm scolding myself? Alice, the eternally innocent child, Kingsley, reached out and covered her face. She couldn't deny that her actions were unpredictable, because even she didn't know what she would want to do the next second. Even if she made up her mind, she might forget it at some point, just like in Xang will. Wait, who is that again? Alice pinched her brow, struggling to retrieve Zhangwil's name from her memory, only to find that he had once killed her, and that the last time she remembered Zhangwil, Klein had wondered why she could forget something like that. Next time I definitely won't forget. Alice desperately recalled everything about Zhangwil, vowing to engrave him in her mind. Wait a minute, I know this one. Alice slapped the table, realizing with a sudden enlightenment. I can write his and Klein's love story. Tisk tisk, the renegade knight bishop and the newly promoted evil god, Mr. Fool. Even though this story might never see the light of day, Alice couldn't help but start conceiving its details and title. Alice's fingertips tapped a rhythmic melody on the table, and her thoughts followed the rhythm, soaring into the distance. It's better to decide the content first to make naming easier, right? First, under the Evernight goddess's protection, the long-dormant ancient deity, the great Mr. Fool, awoke in a young town resident named Klein. Having just experienced a Beander event, he was naturally noticed by the Evernight goddess's subordinates, the Nighthawks, and eventually brought into the church. On his first day in the church, Klein saw a wanted poster, featuring the renegade former Night Church Archbishop Zhangwil. He fled with a grade 0 sealed artifact numbered 008, which appeared as a quill that could write without ink. The middle part. Let's skip the middle part. It's always more or less according to the real situation, but his final death should be at Ince's own hands, after which he vows revenge. I should be deleted, otherwise there would be two evil gods here, which would be quite strange. That's probably the reasonable plot development after deleting me. Finally, I remember Ince. No, Ince Zhangwil took out my heart, right. This plot can also be arranged for Klein. Then, in short, he tries to get revenge, becoming entangled with Ince Zhangwil during the process. They get to know each other, become acquainted, and fall in love during this process. The ending, as for the ending, this should be a bad ending, right? It's hard to make a revenge story have a happy ending, and it would make the protagonist a bit. A bad ending allows for plots of intertwined love and hate, immense pain, which is both reasonable and can generate many plot points. Note 1. What kind of ending would be best to write? For this kind of story, though it's a bit cliché, it's truly the most suitable. Ince Zhangwil is attracted to Klein, and ultimately sacrifices his life during Klein's ritual to once again ascend to godhood and become the Fool. Although Mr. Fool finally becomes a deity, he remains alone until the very end, falling into slumber to escape a world without her. What a moving story. So, what should it be called? Alice smoothly conceived the story's content. Next, she began to fret over naming it. After much deliberation, Alice found that naming this story was far more difficult than naming Eamon and Leonard. She seemed unable to come up with a simple and understandable name that covered the key points. Since that was the case, Alice propped her chin with her hand and murmured to herself. Such a dramatic story development and ending can actually be linked to fate. Should the fact that the story is a bad ending be written in the title? If not, it's like luring a dog in to kill it. However, I don't really need to hide this, after all, I'm not actually writing it for others to read. Then the title can use words like elegy. Alice's eyes darted, and she curved into a smile, writing the title on a piece of paper. Woven by Fate, an elegy of the Red Moon. End of this chapter. Chapter 360. Chapter 43 is the Time Worm Delicious. If you can't come up with a simple and easy to understand book title, then come up with one that no one understands. This was Alice's true thought when she wrote this title. In fact, even Alice herself didn't quite understand the title she wrote. She was very clear that this title was actually something she had cobbled together herself. Of course, this didn't stop Alice from treasuring the title and writing it down on paper, along with the detailed content she had just thought of, then sacrificing it to Mr. Fool. Why not personally go above the gray fog and tell Mr. Fool? How simple. Because she was afraid of getting hit. In the final things given to Klein, Alice actually added some other content. For example, the last words written by 008 were Ince Zhangwil's heartfelt confession to Mr. Fool. How fitting. Although Klein felt that anything that made Alice so excited couldn't be good, he still accepted Alice's suggestion to sacrifice it for him to see, albeit with some doubt. The immediate consequence of Alice's actions soon became apparent. Klein finished reading the content of those few pages above the gray fog, then expressionlessly tore the papers to shreds. She really was too idle. Klein gritted his teeth, suddenly regretting his impulsive act of tearing the papers just now. He thought for a moment, returned to the real world, prepared a ritual, and rewrote the content he had seen, word for word. Good, even the handwriting hadn't changed. Klein placed the copied content above the gray fog, deciding to show it to the goddess if he had the chance. This was mainly due to his personality not being as boring as Alice's. He wouldn't bother the goddess over such trivial matters. If it were Alice, these few pages might have already been sacrificed. Oh no, wait, if it were Alice, she would either teach that person a lesson, or spread an even more outrageous rumor, right? Should I also? Never mind, better not. Although he briefly entertained the thought of imitating Alice and spreading an even more outrageous rumor about her, Klein quickly abandoned the idea. Because he knew Alice's personality well and understood that if he really did such a thing, in the next story, he wouldn't be Klein, but Corian. Note 1. No, that would still be good. With Alice's creativity, Klein was very worried that one day he would encounter something Eamon had encountered. Finally, on a beautiful day, he gave birth to 108 children in one go. That sounded truly terrible. After all, such things might just be jokes for others. If it were Alice, Klein was genuinely a little worried she would make things real. Wait, no, what about Zangwill's? Klein felt he couldn't imagine the scene of Zangwill sacrificing his life during his ascension ritual. However, not everything she writes has to be true, right? After all, if that were the case, Eamon would have to fall in love with both me and Leonard. Is that really possible? Klein's eyes gradually became bewildered. I do know Eamon has many avatars, but do these avatars have their own rituals? Confusing thoughts churned in his mind. After a long while, Klein finally realized something. His thoughts had completely strayed. Alice. Klein really wanted to curse Alice a few times through the prayer channel, but he knew that would only make Alice happier, because it meant her prank was successful, and he was fuming. Unless he was genuinely angry and would give her the cold shoulder, then she would probably take it seriously. But he wasn't a child like Alice. How could he get upset over such a small matter? Wait, this doesn't seem like a small matter. Klein, who had grown accustomed to Alice causing trouble everywhere, fell silent. Alice didn't know what Klein was struggling with. In fact, because she wasn't scolded after sending the things over, Alice was even a little disappointed. After all, she did such things precisely to hear Klein scold her a couple of times. So much fun, hee. After failing to get scolded, Alice thought for a few seconds and then made a new decision. She'd deal with it after waking up. Alice dreamed of an endless ocean. In her dream, she was piloting a small boat, navigating through dense darkness, avoiding reefs, crossing waves, searching for a mysterious treasure. Rumors about this treasure had circulated on the sea for a long time. It was said that only truly fated individuals could find this treasure. If someone not fated forcibly ventured in, returning empty-handed would be the best outcome. Most of the time, these people would die miserably after a brief moment of glory. But Alice believed she was undoubtedly the fated one. After all, if not even she was, who else deserved this title? Confidently, she boarded a ship and set off alone. After a difficult journey, she finally found the location of the treasure. Stepping inside the treasure's interior, the first thing that attracted Alice was a passage. The passage ahead seemed ancient. Even Alice, who knew nothing about it, could discern its long history from the murals on its walls. Her breathing softened, and she cautiously stepped forward. The end was the hiding place of the treasure. The resplendent golden light immediately captured Alice's gaze. Alice ran over with quick steps and scooped up a pile of gold coins and jewels from the ground. The touch in her hands was the cold and hardness of treasure. Alice recalled scenes she had seen in movies and TV shows, a gold coin in her left hand, a jewel in her right. After mimicking the gesture, she grabbed a gold coin, put it in her mouth, and bit down. The gold coin's texture wasn't as hard as a jewel, but it wasn't soft either. It had good toughness and elasticity, and its surface was slightly rough, seemingly segmented, but very lively. It was even wiggling in her mouth, wiggling. Alice opened her eyes in horror, mouth agape. The thing in her mouth fell out, it was a worm with 12 segments. Alice stiffly looked down. The surrounding treasures, along with the jewel in her hand, shed their disguise, revealing their true forms. 1, 2, 3, countless worms of time writhed, spread all around, trying to surge towards her. It was a sight that would make anyone with trypophobia's scalp tingle, not to mention, she was still holding a handful. Alice momentarily forgot to react. She stared blankly as the handful of worms of time crawled across her palm and the back of her hand, creating a slightly itchy sensation. In that silent bewilderment, a familiar and smiling voice rang out. Do worms of time taste good? End of chapter. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.